Sit and eat with me, sir. No one should be alone on Thanksgiving, Annie Carter whispered, especially when they're waiting for someone they love in a place like this. After she said it, she placed her only bowl of soup on the empty chair beside Richard Blackwood. Richard looked at it as if it were some object left by mistake. Then he lifted his eyes to the young woman standing beside the cleaning cart. His voice came out rough. You're wasting your kindness, girl. I'm not hungry, and I don't need pity. Annie did not seem offended. She sat down on the chair 1 seat away from him, close enough to share the silence, far enough to respect his pain. She gave him a small smile, tired but steady. This isn't pity, sir. It's sharing. Tonight is Thanksgiving, and I bet your stomach is protesting almost as loudly as your heart is. Richard's mouth twisted into something colder than a smile. He did not touch the soup. I pay this hospital to save my daughter, he said, his voice low and sharp. Not to pay cleaning staff to interfere in private matters. Take this, and go before I call your supervisor. Annie paused, but she did not move away. I know you're worried, she said softly. And I know this hallway is cold tonight. You need a little warmth if you're going to keep waiting. This isn't pity, sir. It's just a little sharing from someone who is spending the holiday alone too. I don't need food, Richard said. Take it and go do your job. My job is cleaning, she said. But my father used to say that when a person is hurting right in front of you, pretending not to see them is its own kind of mess. Richard turned his face away. Behind the emergency room doors, Clara Blackwood, his only daughter, was fighting for her life. Richard stared at those doors until the white paint seemed to blur. I have money, he muttered. Annie almost did not hear him. Richard's shoulders lowered, and tears he had held back for years began to run down his face. I have enough money to buy this entire hospital, he said, his voice breaking. I can buy the most expensive machines in the world. I can hire any doctor, fly in any specialist, build a new wing by morning if I want to. He pressed one shaking hand against his mouth, then dropped it helplessly. So why can't I buy one steady heartbeat for my daughter? Why can't I buy that? Annie did not answer right away. She looked toward the emergency doors, then back at the man beside her. As long as there's still a heartbeat on that monitor, she said carefully, you still have a chance. Richard lifted his head. His eyes were wet, red, almost childlike in their fear. He seemed to know she was only trying to comfort him, but the words reached him anyway. They gave him something small to hold on to. He swallowed hard. Thank you for saying that. Annie smiled, not brightly, not as if anything had been fixed, but gently enough to make the hallway feel a little less cold. Then maybe you can thank me by eating a little. This time, Richard did not push the bowl away. He took it with both hands. He looked at the young woman beside him again. What's your name? Annie, she said. Annie Carter, sir. He studied her badge, then her face. Annie Carter, she nodded. And I'm guessing you're Richard Blackwood, the Richard Blackwood people talk about on TV. A bitter sound, almost a laugh, left him. Yes, he said. And I'm also a father terrified that all his money may not be enough to save his little girl. Richard lowered his gaze to the soup. We haven't spoken in 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years. I used to tell myself she needed time, that she would come back when she understood I was only trying to protect her. But the truth is, his fingers tightened around the bowl. The truth is, she hated the way I loved her. Maybe she had every right to. Annie listened without interrupting. She wanted her own life, Richard continued. I wanted to choose it for her. Her school, her work, the people around her, even the man she loved. I told myself fathers are supposed to protect their daughters, but maybe I wasn't protecting her. Maybe I was just afraid of losing control. His voice grew smaller, and now the first time I see her after all these years, she's behind those doors, and I don't even know if she'll wake up long enough for me to say all the things I should have said when she could still walk away from me. Annie's eyes softened. There was grief in them too, the kind that recognized another person's grief without needing an explanation. Family is where people are supposed to understand and love each other, she said. Not perfectly. Nobody does that perfectly. But if she wakes up, and I believe she will, then you tell her. Tell her everything. Not the way a powerful man talks, the way a father talks. Richard looked at her. Annie continued, her voice steady. My father used to say family isn't something you hold in your fist. It's something you hold with open hands. Maybe your daughter needed room to breathe. Maybe now you can give her that. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Chance, he whispered. Do I really still have a chance? As long as you don't give up hope, Annie said. And as long as the doctors are still fighting for her, yes, sir, you still have a chance. Before Richard could answer, the emergency doors swung open. A physician stepped out, his surgical cap pulled low, his face marked by exhaustion. Family of Clara Blackwood? Richard stood so quickly the bowl nearly slipped from his hands. Annie caught it before it fell. I'm her father, he said. I'm Richard Blackwood. The doctor moved closer. Mr. Blackwood, your daughter has internal bleeding. We're working to control it, but she needs an urgent transfusion. Her blood type is rare, and our current supply is not enough. Richard did not hesitate. Take mine. The doctor blinked. Sir, we'll need to test compatibility first. Then test me now, Richard said, the coldness gone from his voice, replaced by something fierce and raw. I'm her father. Our blood type matches. Take whatever you need, as much as you safely can. Just save my daughter. Annie watched him follow the doctor down the hall, his expensive coat loose around his shoulders. His steps hurried and uneven. She stood alone beside the empty chair, holding the bowl he had finally accepted. A faint smile touched her tired face. This Thanksgiving night, Annie Carter would still work until morning. Her feet would still ache. Her paycheck would still be small. She would still go home to a room too quiet for a girl her age. But she knew something had changed in that hallway. Now Richard sat on the edge of a narrow bed while a nurse wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his arm and asked him questions he could barely hear. Any history of fainting during blood draws, Mr. Blackwood? No. Have you eaten tonight? He thought of the soup Annie had given him, the warmth he had barely tasted before the doctor appeared. A little. The nurse looked at him over the clipboard. A little isn't much. My daughter needs blood, Richard said. Do whatever you have to do. She did not soften, but her voice remained calm. We will, sir. But we need you steady, too. If you pass out before we get what we need, that doesn't help her. That silenced him more effectively than any argument could have. Richard nodded once and let her continue. When they were done, he tried to stand too quickly. The room tilted. The nurse put a hand against his shoulder and pushed him back down. Not yet. I need to know what's happening. And you will know it sitting down. I own 3 hospitals, Richard snapped before he could stop himself. The nurse gave him a look that would have humbled a stronger man. Then you should know better than to argue with a nurse. He lowered his gaze. You're right. I'm sorry. The nurse blinked once, surprised. Then she handed him a small carton of orange juice. Drink this. He did. Hours later, Richard sat beside Clara's hospital bed, with a white bandage still pressed against the inside of his arm. A quiet click broke through the room. The door opened, and Annie stepped in with her cleaning cart. In one hand, she carried a warm towel folded neatly. When she saw Richard sitting exactly where she had left him, still as stone, she slowed her steps. Mr. Richard, she said gently, placing the towel on the table beside the bed. You've been sitting here for 6 hours since the transfusion ended. The doctor said the surgery went well, but she has a long recovery ahead. You should close your eyes for a little while. Richard raised his head. The sharpness he had worn the night before was gone. His voice was hoarse. I can't sleep, Annie. Every time I close my eyes, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten here in time, or if I hadn't matched her blood type. But you were here, Annie said, quiet but firm. She stepped to the other side of the bed and smoothed the blanket over Clara's legs. And she made it through. That's the only thing that matters right now. Richard looked down at Clara's hand resting inside his. It seemed too small there. This was the same hand that had once gripped his finger when she was learning to walk. The same hand that had slammed his office door 3 years ago when she walked out of his life. I'm sorry, he whispered. Clara, I'm sorry. His voice broke on the second apology. He looked at Annie with something close to panic. I have so much to say to her, but seeing her like this, I don't know where to begin. I'm afraid when she wakes up, she'll look at me the way she did 3 years ago, like I'm the last person she wants in the room. Annie glanced toward the small table near the... If you can't say it when she wakes up, why don't you write it down now? Richard stared at the paper. Write a letter? My father used to say words on paper carry the weight of honesty. Because you have to think with your whole heart before you put them down. Richard gave a faint, humorless breath. I don't remember the last time I wrote anything by hand. I signed contracts electronically. I approved deals with initials on a screen. Then this is a good time to practice again. Annie pushed the paper closer to him. Write what you want her to know before she wakes up. Write how sorry you are. Write what you miss. Write the truth without trying to make yourself look better. Richard looked at the pen as if it required more courage than any negotiation he had ever walked into. Then he looked back at Annie. Thank you, he said. Again. She nodded and turned as if to continue her work, but Richard noticed how slowly she moved. Annie. She stopped. You've been working since last night, haven't you? She tucked a loose curl behind her ear, suddenly a little embarrassed. Yes. I picked up a day shift for someone who needed off. Holiday pay helps. You should be resting. So should you. That almost made him smile. Then Annie shrugged. I'm an orphan, Mr. Richard. I had to put college on hold and work nights here. Last night, I was alone too. In a strange way, because of you, I wasn't as alone as I expected. Richard frowned, not with judgment but with the instinct of a man trained to notice imbalance. You put college on hold because of money? Yes, sir. A girl as intelligent and compassionate as you shouldn't be spending her future in hospital corridors for a few dollars an hour. Annie's smile carried a trace of bitterness, but no self-pity. To you, it's a few dollars. To me, it's rent. It's groceries. It's milk and old books for the children at Street Luke's Community Church. That place took me in when I had no one. The roof started leaking after last week's storm, and if we don't help, some of those kids will be sleeping under buckets and cold drafts. Richard went still. He had heard the name Street Luke's before, though he could not yet place why. But before the thought settled, his eyes returned to Annie. I was cruel to you, he said. Annie looked toward Clara. Considering the night you were having, I can understand it. That doesn't excuse it. No, she said, but it explains it. The answer was simple and kinder than he deserved. Annie's gaze moved toward the door, as if seeing another hospital room in another year. Before my father died, he told me something I've carried ever since. Family is meant to be loved, not owned. If you pushed your daughter too hard, if you tried to shape her life instead of listening to it, then yes, you were wrong, but you still have a chance right here, right now. If you mean it, she'll feel that. If Annie's words touched your heart, please like this video. Comment where you are watching from, because someone near you may be watching this story too. Richard absorbed the words in silence. Then he stood, unsteady but determined, and moved closer to Clara. Clara? He said, but her name caught in his throat. There was no response. He sat in the chair beside her bed again. Annie took one quiet step back. I'll leave you two alone, she said. And please eat something later, Mr. Richard. He nodded, still looking at Clara. I truly am grateful to you. Annie did not answer with a speech. She simply gave him a small, respectful smile and slipped out with her cart, closing the door softly behind her. Richard reached for Clara's hand. It was warm, but too still. I don't know if you can hear me, he whispered, and I don't know if I deserve for you to hear me, but I'm here. The monitor kept its steady beat. He looked at the blank paper on the table. For once, there was no assistant to draft the words, no attorney to polish them, no boardroom language to hide behind. Richard picked up the pen. His fingers trembled as he bent over the first page. Dear Clara, he wrote. Then he stopped, swallowed hard, and added the words he had not earned yet but still needed to say. Dear Clara, my daughter. Richard did not know how long he sat with the pen in his hand after writing those first words. Dear Clara, my daughter. The sentence looked small on the page, almost childish, and yet it had taken more from him than signing a 9-figure acquisition ever had. He stared at it until the letters blurred. What came after an apology when a man had spent years pretending he had nothing to apologize for? He crossed out nothing. That was the first rule he gave himself. No editing to sound better. No polishing the ugly parts. Clara had lived with the truth. She deserved to read it without decoration. I don't know if you can hear me right now, he wrote, but I hope some part of you knows I am here. I should have been here long before tonight. I should have been there when you asked me to listen instead of manage. I should have been there when you told me your dreams and I treated them like mistakes in a business plan. His hand tightened around the pen. The muscles between his fingers ached. He had not written more than a signature by hand in years. I told myself I was protecting you. I see now that I was protecting my pride. I was afraid you would choose a life I could not control, and instead of trusting the woman you had become, I tried to pull you back into the shape I understood. The monitor beside Clara continued its steady rhythm. Richard looked up every few seconds, watching the green line move across the screen. As long as it moved, Annie had said, there was still a chance. He wrote for nearly an hour. He wrote about the Thanksgiving when Clara was 8 and put too much whipped cream on her pie. He wrote about the time she painted a blue sun in kindergarten and argued with him because the sky gets to be blue every day, so the sun should try it once. He wrote about the recital he missed, the birthday dinner he left early, the night she stood in his office and told him she was tired of being treated like one of his properties. When he finally stopped, the page was crowded, uneven, and damp where his hand had rested too long. He folded nothing. He placed the letter on the bedside table where Clara would see it if she opened her eyes. By morning, the hospital had changed its sound. Night shift quiet gave way to rolling carts. Soft announcements. Shoes moving quickly across polished floors. Nurses changed shifts. Families woke in chairs with stiff necks. Somewhere down the hall, a child cried because someone had taken away a toy during an exam. Life kept moving with no respect for Richard's private devastation. Dr. Elaine Porter came in just after 7. She checked Clara's chart, looked at the monitors, examined the IV lines, and spoke with the nurse before turning to Richard. She's stable for now, she said. For now, Richard repeated. That is not a small thing, Mr. Blackwood. He nodded, though he still hated the uncertainty. When will she wake up? We don't know yet. Her body has been through major trauma. We're keeping her sedated while we monitor swelling, bleeding, and her response to treatment. It may be today. It may take longer. Longer meaning hours? Possibly. Or days. Richard looked at Clara. And when she wakes? Dr. Porter's expression softened, but only a little. Then recovery begins. And it will not be easy. Physically or emotionally. He understood what she meant. Clara's body was not the only thing broken in that room. I'll stay, he said. The doctor studied him for a moment. Good, but staying means more than being in the chair. I know. I'm not sure you do yet, she said, not unkindly. But you can learn. After she left, Richard reached for his phone. There were 37 missed calls, most from executives, 2 from his attorney, 6 from Victor Harlan. The last name made his jaw tighten out of habit. Victor handled the real estate side of the empire with a level of efficiency Richard had always valued. Ruthless, precise, never sentimental. The old Richard would have called him first. Instead, he called his assistant. Cancel everything for the week, Richard said. There was a stunned pause. Everything, sir? Yes. The Blackstone meeting, the Denver closing, the Southside redevelopment review. Everything. Should I tell Mr. Harlan you'll review the Southside file remotely? Richard glanced at Clara. Tell Victor I'm unavailable. Sir, he said, the timeline is sensitive. So is my daughter's pulse. He ended the call before she could answer. A small sound came from the doorway. Annie stood there with a fresh pitcher of water and 2 paper cups. Her hair was tied back, and the shadows beneath her eyes were deeper than before. That sounded like a businessman learning a new language, she said. Richard set the phone down. Was I that bad? You sounded like it hurt to say no. It did. Then it probably matters. She stepped inside and replaced the empty pitcher. Richard noticed she moved carefully, as if conserving energy. You're still working, he said. Only a few more hours. You said that yesterday. That was yesterday's few more hours. He looked at her shoes again. The right sole had begun to separate near the toe. Annie, when do you sleep? She laughed under her breath. Usually when my body stops asking politely and starts making decisions for me. That isn't funny. It is if you're poor enough. He did not know what to say to that. In his world, exhaustion was a badge worn by men who could afford vacations and chose not to take them. Annie's exhaustion was different. It had rent attached to it. Before he could speak, a nurse entered to adjust Clara's medication. Annie stepped aside, lowering her gaze the way employees often did when they did not want to be in the way. Richard noticed it. He noticed how easily people expected her to become invisible. When the nurse left, Richard said, "You shouldn't have to work like this." Annie's smile disappeared. A lot of people shouldn't have to do a lot of things, Mr. Richard, but should doesn't pay bills. Let me help. Her answer came fast. No, you don't even know what I was going to offer. I know men with money usually think help means taking over. The words struck him because they were true. I wasn't trying to take over. Maybe not on purpose. He looked at Clara. The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was honest. Annie softened. I'm not saying you're a bad man. I have been. I'm saying you're used to fixing things by making them belong to you. Some things don't need an owner. They need a witness, a friend, sometimes just a person who doesn't walk away. Richard absorbed that slowly. My daughter said something like that, he admitted. Then she sounds smart. She is. Then listen to her when she wakes up. The words were simple. The hard part would be obeying them. Annie turned to leave, but Clara's fingers moved. It was small, barely more than a twitch against the sheet. Richard leaned forward so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Clara? The nurse at the station heard him and came in. Annie stayed by the door, still as a held breath. Clara's eyelids fluttered once, then closed again. Is she waking? Richard asked. The nurse checked the monitor, and Clara's response. Not fully, but it's a good sign. A good sign. Richard held on to the phrase like a man in deep water gripping wood. After the nurse left, he looked at Annie. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She moved, he said. Annie smiled. Then maybe she heard you. Richard looked at the letter on the table. Maybe. Annie nodded toward the paper. Keep writing. So he did. That afternoon, after Annie's shift finally ended, she stopped once more outside Clara's room. Richard was bent over a second page, writing slowly. His broad shoulders curved with a humility that had not been there the night before. Annie did not interrupt him. She walked toward the employee exit with sore feet and an empty stomach. But there was a quiet warmth in her chest. Not happiness exactly. The world was still hard. Street Luke's roof still leaked. Her tuition was still unpaid. The children at the church still needed coats before the cold deepened. But in room 417, a father had put down his phone and picked up a pen. For one Thanksgiving night and the morning after it, that felt like something worth thanking God for. By the time Annie reached Street Luke's community church, the afternoon sky had turned the color of wet concrete. A cold wind moved through the south side streets, lifting paper cups along the curb and rattling the loose metal sign above the church steps. She had been awake for more than 30 hours, but she still stopped at the corner store to buy a half-gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and 2 used children's books from the wire bin near the register. The cashier, Mr. Lewis, looked at her uniform and shook his head. Girl, you still standing? Mostly, Annie said. You work Thanksgiving night too? And Thanksgiving morning, and a little bit of Thanksgiving afternoon, if we're being honest. He put the milk in a bag and slid one of the books toward her. Take that one, no charge. My granddaughter outgrew it. Annie smiled, tired but grateful. The kids will love it. Tell Sister Margaret I said the roof man still hasn't called me back. I will. Street Luke's was not large or beautiful in the way rich people use the word. It was made of old brick, with narrow stained glass windows and wooden doors that swelled in damp weather. The front steps had a crack down one side. Inside, the air smelled of soup, floor wax, and old hymnals. To Annie, it smelled like shelter. She pushed through the side door and heard children before she saw them. Laughter came from the basement, followed by the scrape of folding chairs and Sister Margaret's voice telling someone not to run with a plastic fork in his hand. Annie went downstairs. The basement was warm in patches and cold everywhere else. A row of buckets sat under the far wall where water had leaked through the roof during last week's storm. 2 boys were doing math homework at one table. A little girl in a red sweater was asleep on a pile of donated coats. 3 teenagers were stacking canned goods near the pantry shelves. Sister Margaret looked up from a soup pot when Annie came in. She was 71, small, sharp-eyed, and moved with the authority of someone who had spent half her life telling grief it could sit down but not take over. Annie Carter, she said, don't tell me you came here straight from the hospital. I won't tell you. That means yes. Annie set the grocery bag on the counter. Milk, bread, and a book from Mr. Lewis. Sister Margaret took one look at her face and lowered the spoon. Sit. I'm fine. You are standing by habit, not by strength. Sit. Annie obeyed because Sister Margaret had earned that tone. A boy named Deshaun ran up to her with a folded paper turkey in his hand. Miss Annie, look, I made this yesterday. It has 3 eyes. Annie said. It sees extra gratitude. That makes sense. He grinned and ran off. Sister Margaret placed a bowl of soup in front of Annie. Eat before you fall into my floor. Annie stared at it and thought of Richard Blackwood sitting beside Clara's bed, writing with a shaking hand. I gave mine away last night, she said. To who? A man at the hospital. A patient? A father. Sister Margaret sat across from her. That sounds like a story. Annie took a spoonful of soup, letting the warmth settle in her chest before answering. His daughter was in surgery. He was sitting alone like the whole world had left him there, so I gave him my soup. And he was rude. That does not surprise me. Grief has bad manners. Annie almost laughed. He threatened to call my supervisor. Sister Margaret's eyes narrowed. Do I need to pray for him? Or at him? He changed, Annie said quickly. Not all the way, but enough to cry. Enough to listen. Enough to give blood for his daughter. He stayed with her. He wrote her a letter. The older woman studied her. Who was he? Annie hesitated. Richard Blackwood. The name made the basement feel quieter, though the children kept moving around them. Sister Margaret leaned back. Blackwood, as in Blackwood Development? Yes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Annie knew that look. She had seen it at church meetings all month, when Sister Margaret spread papers across the table and tried to explain property taxes, repair notices, and redevelopment letters that used polite words to say the neighborhood was worth more without them in it. He is connected to the project, Sister Margaret said. I don't know how much he knows. Men like that know what makes them money. Annie looked down at her soup. Maybe. But last night he didn't look like money. He looked broken. Broken men can still break other people, baby. I know. Sister Margaret reached across the table and touched Annie's wrist. Your heart is good, but keep your eyes open. Annie nodded. She was not foolish. She knew kindness did not erase power. Richard Blackwood could have a wounded heart and still own the kind of company that turned churches into luxury apartments. Across the city, Richard was beginning to learn that same truth from another direction. In Clara's hospital room, he sat beside the bed with the second letter unfinished. His phone vibrated again and again until he finally turned it over. Victor Harlan's name filled the screen. Richard ignored the first call, then the second. By the third, irritation won. What is it, Victor? Good afternoon to you too, Victor said. His voice was smooth, dry, expensive. I hear there was a family emergency. I'm sorry, of course. Richard looked at Clara, then be sorry quietly. A short pause. Understood. I'll be brief. We need your approval on the South Side acquisition package. The church parcel is the last meaningful holdout, and the partners want movement before Monday. Richard's eyes shifted to the window. Church parcel? Street Lukes. Old building, failing roof, poor books, emotional value but no financial logic. We discussed this in October. Richard remembered a meeting, a map, Victor's pointer tapping blocks shaded in blue. He remembered approving continued negotiations while checking messages from a hotel deal in Phoenix. He did not remember the church's name. That bothered him. What happens to the people using it? Richard asked. Victor gave a soft laugh. People always use old buildings, Richard. That doesn't make them viable. That wasn't my question. The community services can relocate. In theory, there are other nonprofits. In theory, Richard repeated. Victor's tone cooled. You've never been sentimental about underperforming property before. Richard looked at the folded letter beside Clara's bed. Maybe I've been wrong before. Another pause. Longer this time. This isn't the moment to rethink strategy. You're under stress. Let me handle it. Richard heard the old comfort in those words. Let me handle it. Let someone else reduce lives to numbers. Let someone else make the hard choices and bring him clean profits. That arrangement had built half his empire. Send me the full file, Richard said. There's no need. That wasn't a request. Victor's voice tightened. Fine. I'll have my office forward it. And Victor? Yes? Do not pressure that church until I review everything. Richard, delaying now could cost us. Richard looked at Clara's still hand and thought of Annie, saying family was not something held in a fist. Then he thought of children sleeping under buckets in a church basement. Then let it cost us, he said, and ended the call. For several minutes, the only sound was Clara's monitor. Richard opened his laptop. The South Side file arrived within minutes. It was full of polished phrases. Revitalization, luxury mixed, use, distressed asset recovery, strategic displacement, risk, mitigation. He had read hundreds of files like it without feeling anything. This time, one phrase stopped him. Community resistance centered around Street Luke's congregation and youth meal program. Richard sat back. He thought of Annie's worn shoes, her cracked hands, her one bowl of soup, the milk and old books she bought for children no boardroom had ever named. For the first time, he wondered how many of his buildings had been raised on places where someone else used to feel safe. Clara's fingers moved again. Richard turned at once. Clara? Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. He took her hand carefully. "I'm here," he said. "I'm still here." His laptop glowed on the table beside the letters. On the screen was a map of a church he had almost erased without knowing its name. In the bed was a daughter he had almost lost, after forgetting how to say hers with love. Richard Blackwood sat between the two and understood, with a fear that settled deep in his bones, that saving Clara would not be enough if he returned to being the man who had needed saving in the first place. By dawn, Richard had read the South Side file twice and understood less about himself than he had the night before. The numbers were clear. Victor had made sure of that. The projected return was strong, the land value rising, the investors impatient. Street Luke's community church sat in the middle of the plan like an old stone in a polished shoe, small enough to dismiss if a man only looked at maps. But now Richard had seen the basement. He had seen the buckets catching rainwater. He had heard Annie say children would sleep cold if the roof was not repaired. He had watched her give away the only Thanksgiving meal she had, then return to work as if kindness were simply part of her shift. For years, he had approved projects by asking what could be built, what could be earned, what could be controlled. He could not remember the last time he had asked who would be hurt. Clara shifted in the bed. Richard looked up at once. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened a fraction. Her gaze moved without focus, slow and heavy from medication. For one breath, he was too afraid to speak. "Clara," he said softly. Her eyes turned toward the sound. Confusion crossed her face first, then pain, then recognition. Her lips parted. "Dad?" The word nearly undid him. "I'm here," he said, leaning forward. "You're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but you're safe now. The doctors are taking care of you." She blinked, trying to understand. Her voice came out thin. "Why are you here?" It was not anger yet. It was worse. It was disbelief. Richard had imagined this moment all night. In every version, he had found something dignified to say. Something simple, strong, fatherly. But when Clara looked at him from that hospital bed, pale and wounded and still his child beneath all the years between them, dignity left him. "Because I should have been here long before tonight." Her eyes closed for a moment. He thought she had drifted back under, but then she whispered, "Don't. Don't what?" "Don't make this a speech." The words were weak, but they were Clara, clear, direct, unwilling to let him hide behind language. Richard nodded. "All right, no speech." She looked at the bandage on his arm. "What happened?" "You needed blood. I was a match." Her gaze stayed there a moment. "Of course you were." He did not know how to read that. Gratitude. Bitterness. Exhaustion. Maybe all three. Dr. Porter entered before either of them could say more. She smiled when she saw Clara awake, but kept her voice measured. "Welcome back, Miss Blackwood. You gave us a busy Thanksgiving." Clara tried to shift and winced. "Easy," Dr. Porter said. "You have significant injuries. We controlled the internal bleeding. But you need rest, monitoring, and time. A lot of time." Clara's eyes found Richard again. "How long was I out?" "Not long," the doctor said, "but long enough to scare everyone. I don't remember much." "That's normal." Richard stood back while Dr. Porter checked her responses. He wanted to ask questions, wanted to demand timelines, wanted to know every possible outcome, but he stayed quiet until the doctor finished. When she left, Clara looked at him. That was new. "What was? You not interrupting a doctor?" The remark almost made him smile, but there was too much pain in her face. "I'm trying to listen more." She turned her head slightly toward the window. "That would have been useful 3 years ago." "I know." The answer surprised her. He saw it. The old Richard would have defended himself. He would have said she misunderstood, that he had only wanted what was best, that one day she would thank him. The new Richard, if he deserved to use that phrase at all, had nothing to defend. Clara's throat moved. "I'm tired." "Then rest. I'll be here." Her eyes returned to him, sharper now despite the medication. "For how long?" "As long as you allow me." "That's not what I asked." Richard took the blow because he had earned it. "For as long as it takes. Even if you don't want to talk to me. Even if you're angry. I'm not going back to pretending silence is peace." Clara did not answer. But she did not tell him to leave. That was enough for the moment. Annie came by mid-morning with fresh linens and a quiet knock. When she saw Clara awake, her face brightened before she controlled it. "Well," Annie said, keeping her voice gentle, "good to see you on this side of the morning, Miss Blackwood." Clara looked at her, confused. "Do I know you?" "No, ma'am. I'm Annie. I work here," Richard added. "She sat with me last night." Clara's eyes moved between them. "You sat with him?" Annie gave a small shrug. He looked like he needed somebody to tell him not to fall apart in public. Despite the pain, Clara's mouth twitched. "That sounds like him." Richard accepted that too. Annie changed the water pitcher and adjusted the blanket with practiced care. Clara watched her hands. "You're young," Clara said. 18. "You work here full-time?" "Full-time, part-time, overtime. Depends who's asking and which bill is due." Clara studied her for a moment, then closed her eyes. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Annie said, "but so is waking up after surgery, so I won't complain to the wrong audience." This time Clara almost smiled. Richard watched the exchange and felt a strange ache. Annie spoke to Clara without fear, without calculation, without trying to win anything. She gave warmth without crowding the room. He wondered when he had forgotten how to do that. After Annie left, Clara slept again. Richard took the letters from the table and wondered whether to hide them before she woke fully. Then he stopped himself. That was the old habit, controlling what she saw, when she saw it, how she might respond. He left them where they were. Near noon, Victor called again. Richard stepped into the hallway, keeping Clara's door in sight. "I told you not to pressure Street Lukes," Richard said, "and I told you delay is expensive." Victor replied, "The church is weak. Their roof damage gives us leverage. If we wait, some neighborhood activist will turn it into a morality play. It is a church with children in the basement. It is a liability with stained glass." Richard looked down the hall. Annie was helping an elderly man settle into a wheelchair, speaking to him with patience no spreadsheet could measure. "Listen to me carefully," Richard said. "No contact with Street Lukes. No third-party pressure. No legal intimidation. Nothing until I review the full history." Victor's voice lowered. "Richard, you are emotional. Your daughter is in the hospital. This is exactly why men in your position delegate. I did delegate. To you. Now I'm questioning what that delegation has cost." A silence followed. "Be careful," Victor said at last. "Guilt makes poor strategy." Richard glanced back into Clara's room. His daughter slept beside a stack of letters he had been too proud to write for 3 years. "No," he said. "Guilt is what happens when a man finally looks at the bill for his strategy." He ended the call. That afternoon, Clara woke again. Her eyes were clearer, though pain still lined her face. She noticed the papers on the table. "What are those?" Richard followed her gaze. "Letters." "To who?" "To you." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because I didn't know if you would wake up. And because if you did, I wasn't sure I'd know how to say any of it without ruining it." Clara looked away. "You usually know what to say." "No," Richard said. "I usually know how to win. That isn't the same thing." The room went quiet. After a while, Clara said, "I'm not ready to read them." "All right. You're not going to insist?" "No. You're not going to tell me I need closure or healing or whatever word people use when they want the person they hurt to hurry up?" Richard's chest tightened. "No." She looked back at him, suspicious of his restraint. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "Clara, I don't want to own your forgiveness. I don't want to manage your anger. I don't want to talk you out of what I did to you. If all you can do right now is, let me sit here, I'll sit here." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She turned her face toward the window, angry at the tears or at him or at the years between them. "You made me feel like I had to disappear to become myself. she whispered. Richard closed his eyes. There it was, not shouted, not dressed in blame, just the truth. "I know," he said, "and I am sorry." "For what?" she asked, still looking away. He understood then that she was not asking for the short answer. She wanted to know whether he knew the shape of the wound. "For calling control protection," he said. "For making your dreams sound childish because they weren't mine. For treating every choice you made like a threat. For thinking money gave me the right to decide what kind of woman you should become." Clara breathed unevenly. "And," he added, voice roughening, "for waiting until you were lying in a hospital bed to become brave enough to say it." She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, weakly. Richard reached for a tissue, then stopped halfway. "May I?" he asked. That small question changed something in her expression. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But recognition. She nodded. He handed her the tissue. She took it without touching his hand. It hurt, but he accepted it. Outside, Annie passed the room and saw them through the narrow glass. Father and daughter, not healed, not whole, but finally speaking without armor. She did not stop. Some moments did not need witnesses. She kept walking down the hall, past the vending machines, past the waiting room where another family sat with untouched coffee, past the window where Chicago carried on as if nothing sacred had happened. In room 417, Clara closed her eyes again, exhausted. Richard sat beside her, the unread letters on the table, the canceled calls on his phone, and Victor's threat still echoing in the back of his mind. For the first time in years, his life was no longer divided between business and family. It was divided between the man he had been and the man he had one chance left to become. By evening, Richard had learned that a hospital day did not move like any other day. There were no real mornings or nights, only medication times, doctor rounds, monitor alarms, and the slow measurement of whether a body was choosing to fight. Clara slept often, woke briefly, asked small questions, then drifted away again before Richard could say half of what pressed against his ribs. He stayed. That was the one thing he knew how to do now because Annie had made it sound simple enough for even a man like him to understand. When Clara slept, he read through the medical notes Dr. Porter allowed him to see. When she woke, he put them away. That was new. 3 days ago, he would have kept reading while pretending to listen. Now he forced himself to look at her face, not the chart. "Stop staring," Clara murmured late that evening. Richard straightened. "Sorry. You look like you're waiting for me to vanish." He did not answer quickly enough. Clara turned her head a little on the pillow. "That's what you're afraid of, isn't it?" "Yes." The honesty made her blink. Richard rubbed both hands over his face. "I'm afraid if I take my eyes off you, something will happen. I know that isn't rational." "No," Clara said. "It's just human." He looked at her then, surprised by the mercy in the word. She seemed surprised by it too, and closed her eyes as if she had given too much. A nurse came in to check her pain level. Clara answered quietly, trying to sound stronger than she was. Richard almost interrupted to say she was hurting more than she admitted, then stopped. He had spent too many years speaking over her. The nurse asked, "Do you want your father to stay while we adjust your medication?" Richard held his breath. Clara looked at him, then at the nurse. "He can stay." It was not forgiveness. It was not even trust. But it was permission, and Richard accepted it like a gift. Later, after Clara fell asleep again, Richard stepped into the hallway to answer a call from his assistant, Meredith. She sounded careful, the way people sounded around him when they expected a storm. "Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Harlan has requested a board review on the South Side project. He says the delay could trigger penalties. Let it trigger them. He also says investors are asking whether you're still personally overseeing active developments." Richard looked through the glass at Clara's still face. "Tell them I am personally overseeing something more important." "Should I say that exactly?" "No, you'd better not." For the first time in days, Meredith gave a small nervous laugh. "Understood. Send me everything on Street Luke's. Not Victor's summary. Everything. Original acquisition notes, community reports, tax notices, correspondence, third-party offers, demolition projections. That may take some time." "Take it." "Sir?" He heard the hesitation. "What is it?" "There are people in the office who will be relieved to hear you asking for original documents again." Richard frowned. "Relieved? You used to read them yourself," she said. "Years ago. before you started letting Victor filter anything with community impact. The words settled heavily. Send the files, he said. He ended the call and stood alone in the hall, feeling the shape of another failure forming around him. It was one thing to learn he had not listened to Clara. It was another to realize he had stopped listening to whole neighborhoods. Near midnight, Annie appeared with a mop bucket and a stack of clean towels balanced on top. She looked less tired than before, only because she had learned how to keep exhaustion from showing too much. You're still here, Richard said. So are you. My daughter is in that room, and my floor is in this hallway. He looked down. It looks clean. That's because I'm good at my job. I didn't mean, I know. Annie leaned the mop against the cart and handed him one of the towels. For your neck. You've been sleeping in that chair like it insulted your family. Richard took it. Thank you. She glanced through the glass at Clara. How is she? Awake sometimes, angry sometimes, in pain more than she admits. That sounds like healing beginning badly, which is still healing. He turned the towel in his hands. She let me stay. Annie's face softened. That matters. It shouldn't feel like so much. Why not? Because I'm her father. Being someone's father doesn't mean the chair is automatically yours, Annie said. Sometimes you have to be invited back to it. Richard absorbed that. A month ago, he would have considered the statement insolent. Tonight it felt accurate. He nodded toward her cart. When is your next day off? Annie gave him a look. Are you asking as a concerned person, or as a billionaire about to make a problem uncomfortable? Concerned person. Sunday afternoon. Maybe. Maybe? Depends if Mrs. Donnelly's daughter can cover her shift. Depends if the church needs help after service. Depends if the roof leaks again. Depends if life decides to be polite, which it usually doesn't. Street Luke's, Richard said carefully. How bad is it? Annie's expression changed. The warmth did not disappear, but caution stepped in front of it. Why? Because my company is involved in the redevelopment plan. I know. The answer struck him. You knew? Not last night. Sister Margaret told me this afternoon after I mentioned your name. And you still came here. You still spoke to me. I can be kind to you and still be careful around your power, Mr. Richard. Those are not the same thing. He had no defense against that. I'm reviewing the project, he said. Victor Harlan pushed it forward. I told him to stop pressuring the church. Annie watched him closely. And will he? He works for me. That wasn't my question. Richard looked away first. Annie sighed, not harshly. Men like him don't stop because somebody says please. They stop when the cost of cruelty gets higher than the profit. The sentence was too sharp to be anything but lived knowledge. Before Richard could answer, Clara's voice came faintly from inside the room. Dad? He turned at once. Annie stepped back, already reaching for the cart. Go, she said. Richard entered the room quickly but quietly. Clara's eyes were open, clearer than before. Her face tightened with pain, but she seemed more present. Do you need the nurse? No, she swallowed. Water. He poured some into a cup, then paused. May I help? A tiny crease appeared between her brows. She understood the question was about more than water. Yes. He held the straw while she drank. The act was so small it embarrassed him with its importance. When she finished, she looked past him toward the hallway. Was that Annie? Yes. She talks to you like you're a regular person. She may be the only one here with the courage. Clara's mouth moved faintly. Good. Richard sat down. She knows about Street Luke's. The church? He nodded. My company is trying to buy the land. Clara closed her eyes, then opened them again. Of course it is. The disappointment in her voice was quiet, but Richard felt it. I didn't know what the place was. You signed off anyway? I approved further negotiations. I didn't read enough. That sounds familiar. He accepted the hit. Yes. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Annie helped you. She did. And your company might take away the place that helped her. Richard's throat tightened. Yes. Then don't just feel bad. I'm looking into it. No, Clara said, her voice weak but firm. Don't look into it like a man trying to decide whether compassion fits the budget. Look at it like someone's home. Richard sat still. Clara turned her face toward the ceiling. You always wanted to build things people had to look up at. Maybe try protecting one place people can run to when they're falling. The words entered him slowly, then stayed. Outside, Annie's mop moved down the hallway in steady strokes. Inside, Clara closed her eyes again, exhausted by the effort of saying what needed to be said. Richard reached for the third blank sheet of paper. This time, the letter was not only to Clara, it was also, in a way he did not yet fully understand, to the man he had been. He wrote, "I am beginning to see the damage I caused by calling control, love, and profit progress. I do not know yet how to repair it, but I know I cannot pretend I did not see it." When he finished the sentence, he looked through the glass toward the hallway where Annie had disappeared. For the first time in many years, Richard Blackwood was not planning how to win. He was trying to learn what was right. The next morning, Richard woke to the sound of Clara coughing. He had fallen asleep in the chair with his jacket folded under one shoulder and the unfinished letter resting on his lap. For a second, he did not know where he was. Then the monitor beeped, Clara winced, and everything returned at once. He sat forward. "Clara, I'm fine," she whispered, though her face said otherwise. He reached toward the call button, then stopped. "Do you want the nurse?" She noticed the pause. "Yes." Richard pressed the button. It was a small thing, asking instead of deciding, but Clara saw it. Her eyes stayed on him while they waited. Neither of them spoke until Nurse Denise came in, checked Clara's breathing, adjusted her medication, and reminded her not to pretend pain was a character test. "I wasn't," Clara said weakly. Nurse Denise gave her a look. "Baby, I've raised 3 sons and buried 1 husband. I know pretending when I see it." Richard stepped back, letting the nurse work. He had met Denise twice already. She was in her late 50s, with calm hands and a voice that made people obey without feeling insulted. She called Clara baby in a way Richard would once have considered too familiar. Now he was grateful for it. After Denise left, Clara drank a little water and lay back, tired from the effort. "You listened," she said. "To what?" "You asked before calling the nurse." Richard looked down at his hands. "I'm trying to stop confusing care with command." "That sounds like something Annie would say." "It does." Clara closed her eyes. "She's good for you," Richard almost answered, but his phone vibrated on the side table. Meredith again. He glanced at Clara. "Take it," she said. "Your face is doing that thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you pretend the phone isn't burning a hole through the table." He picked it up. "Meredith, I have the Street Luke's documents," she said. Her voice was lower than usual. "You need to see them." "I'm listening." "Not on the phone, sir." Richard looked toward Clara. "Send them to my secure drive. I'll review here. There are emails from Victor's team. Some of them are troubling." "Define troubling." Meredith hesitated. "They discussed using the roof damage to pressure the church board. There's also reference to approaching elderly members individually with relocation offers they didn't fully understand." Richard's jaw hardened. "What else?" "A third-party buyer was created to make the offer look separate from Blackwood Development. It wasn't separate. Victor." For years, Richard had valued Victor because he brought clean results from dirty situations without dragging Richard through the mud. Now he wondered whether the mud had always been there and he had simply admired the shine on his shoes. "Send everything," Richard said. "Do not copy Victor." "Understood." "And Meredith?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you for telling me plainly." Another pause. "You asked plainly." After the call ended, Clara watched him. "Bad?" "Yes." "St. Luke's?" "Yes." "Are you surprised?" Richard wanted to say yes. He wanted the comfort of ignorance. Instead, he said, "Not enough." Clara turned her face toward the window. The morning light made her bruises look sharper. "That's honest, at least." He opened the files on his laptop. Clara did not ask to see them, but she did not sleep either. Richard read in silence. Emails. Internal notes. Property assessments. Phrases meant to sound legal and clean. Minimize community delay. Apply tax pressure before winter. Encourage leadership fatigue. Frame displacement as improvement. One line from Victor stood out. Street Luke's congregation is emotionally attached but financially weak. Push before holiday sympathy becomes a problem. Richard read it twice. He closed the laptop. Clara saw his face. "What?" Victor knew Thanksgiving would make people care. "People already cared," Clara said. "He meant people with cameras." Richard stood, walked to the window, then came back. The room suddenly felt too small for the anger moving through him. "I let him run that division for 8 years. Did you know he did things like this?" I knew he was aggressive. That's the word powerful men use when cruelty makes money. Richard looked at her. She had little strength, but there was nothing weak in her eyes. You sound like your mother, he said. Good. He nodded. Yes, good. Near noon, Annie came in with a tray she had talked someone in the cafeteria into assembling. Plain toast, broth, applesauce for Clara when allowed, and coffee for Richard that smelled like it had lost hope hours ago. Hospital fine dining, she said. Clara opened one eye. Is the coffee punishment? For your father, maybe. Richard took the cup. I deserve worse. Annie looked between them. That sounds like progress. Clara's mouth lifted a little. He found out about Street Luke's. Annie's shoulders tightened. The change was small, but Richard caught it. I'm not here to defend myself, he said. Good, Annie replied, because I'm too tired to listen politely. Clara gave a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. Richard set the coffee down. Annie, I read the files. Victor used pressure tactics. My company hid behind a third-party buyer. They targeted the church because the roof damage made you vulnerable. Annie's face went still. Sister Margaret suspected. She shouldn't have had to suspect. She should have been treated honestly. That would be new. Richard accepted the rebuke. I'm stopping all movement on the deal. Annie studied him. Stopping, or pausing until people stop watching? Stopping while I investigate. And if what I've read is accurate, canceling. If, I need the full record. Mr. Richard, Annie said, her voice quiet now. While men like you gather full records, people like Sister Margaret lose sleep wondering if children will have a warm room next month. Clara looked at her father. She's right, Richard exhaled. Then I'll act today. Annie seemed ready to argue, then stopped. She looked suddenly older than 18. Don't do it because you feel sorry for me. I don't. Don't do it because I gave you soup. I won't. Do it because it's wrong. Richard held her gaze. I am beginning to understand the difference. The room settled into a silence that did not feel empty. Then Annie pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. Sister Margaret made a list. Families who use the church. Kids in the after-school room. Seniors who get meals. People who don't show up in property reports. Richard took it carefully. There were names, not numbers. Deshawn, age 9. Asthma. Mother works nights. Mrs. Leona Price, widow, needs rides to clinic. Jamal and Tasha, siblings, temporary housing. Mr. Quote, Ellis, Vietnam veteran, no heat in apartment. Under several names, Annie had written small notes in blue ink. Likes dinosaurs. Needs winter boots. Reads below grade level but tries hard. Richard felt something in him recoil. A spreadsheet could be ignored. Names could not. Thank you, he said. Annie nodded. Those are the people under your project. He looked at the paper again. No. Those are the people my project stood over. Clara watched him, and for the first time since waking, the suspicion in her eyes softened into something more complicated. That evening, Richard called Meredith back and gave instructions. Emergency injunction, if needed. Independent counsel. Freeze all acquisition activity. Connected to Street Luke's. Preserve internal communications. No document destruction. No contact with the church except through Sister Margaret's attorney or her direct consent. Meredith was quiet when he finished. Sir, Victor will see this as war. Richard looked at Clara, then at Annie's list of names on the table. No, he said. War is what he was doing to people who couldn't fight back. This is notice. After he hung up, Clara whispered, Dad. He turned. Yes? When I left, I thought you'd never choose people over winning. Richard sat beside her. So did I. And now? Now I'm not sure winning was ever what I thought it was. Clara did not answer, but her hand shifted slightly on the blanket. Not reaching for him, not yet, but no longer pulled away. Richard looked at that small movement and understood it for what it was. Not forgiveness. A door left unlocked. Victor Harlan arrived at Street Catherine Medical Center the next morning wearing a charcoal coat, polished shoes, and the expression of a man who believed every room should know he had entered it. He did not come with flowers. He did not ask for Clara's condition at the front desk. He came with a leather folder tucked under one arm and a smile that had helped close deals with mayors, investors, and frightened property owners who did not realize they were being cornered until the papers were already signed. Richard saw him through the glass before Victor knocked. Clara was awake, propped slightly against her pillows, pale but alert. Annie had brought fresh water 20 minutes earlier and left after reminding Richard that coffee was not a food group. The room was quiet enough that the soft knock sounded rehearsed. "Come in," Richard said. Victor opened the door and stepped inside. "Richard, Clara." He gave her a polite nod. "I'm relieved to see you awake." Clara looked at him without warmth. "Are you?" Victor's smile did not move. "Of course." Richard stood between him and the bed. "Why are you here?" "To see an old friend during a family crisis," Victor said, then lifted the folder slightly. "And because your sudden freeze on Southside activity has created concern. My daughter is in a hospital bed, and I respect that, but the business has not stopped breathing just because you stepped away." Clara turned her head toward Richard. "He talks like that in person too?" Victor's eyes flicked to her, then back to Richard. "I'll be brief. That would be a first," Richard said. The smile thinned. "The investors want assurance. The church matter is being exaggerated by people who understand emotion better than economics. Street. Luke's is structurally compromised, financially unstable, and sitting on land that could serve far more people if redeveloped properly." "Serve far more people," Clara repeated, "meaning people who can afford luxury rent." Victor ignored her. "The offer is generous, more than the property deserves." Richard's face hardened. "The property has a youth meal program, a senior pantry, temporary shelter, and after-school care. It has buckets under a leaking roof. Because your team used the roof damage to pressure them." Victor looked at the closed door, then lowered his voice. "Careful." "No," Richard said. "You be careful." For the first time, Victor's mask showed irritation. "You are making decisions from a hospital chair after a traumatic night. A cleaning girl handed you soup, and now you're ready to dismantle a major development because guilt feels noble." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Say that again." Victor glanced at her. "I'm sorry?" "You called Annie a cleaning girl like she was something stuck to your shoe." Richard took one step closer. "Do not speak about her that way." Victor gave a soft laugh. "This is exactly what I mean. You're emotionally compromised." "Maybe," Richard said. "Or maybe I've been morally compromised for years and am only now noticing who benefited from it." Victor's jaw tightened. "You hired me to do what you were too busy to do. Don't act shocked now that the work got done." Richard did not answer at once. That was the worst part. Victor was not entirely wrong. Richard had wanted distance from the human cost. He had signed authority over to men who did not lose sleep over names on a church list. He could not pretend innocence just because he had not read every cruel sentence. "You're right about one thing," Richard said. "I hired you. That makes this my responsibility." Victor relaxed a fraction, mistaking the admission for surrender. Richard continued. "Which is why you're suspended from all Southside decisions immediately. Meredith will coordinate with outside counsel. You will preserve every document, email, message, and third-party communication connected to Street Luke's." The folder in Victor's hand lowered. "You can't be serious." "I am. You think the board will let you torch a profitable project because your daughter and some church girl made you sentimental?" Clara tried to sit straighter, then winced. Richard turned toward her, but she shook her head once, telling him not to fuss. "Mr. Harlan," Clara said, her voice weak but clear. "My father has done plenty wrong. But if you think decency is just sentimentality, that says more about you than it does about him." Victor looked at Richard. "This is a mistake." "No," Richard said. "The mistake was trusting a man who could look at hungry children and see leverage." The door opened before Victor could respond. Annie stood there holding a tray with broth for Clara and a sandwich she had bullied the cafeteria into making for Richard. She froze when she saw Victor. Her body recognized the kind of man he was before her mind caught up. Victor turned, eyes moving over her uniform, her badge, her worn shoes, and here she is. Richard's voice dropped. "Victor." Annie set the tray down carefully, as if refusing to let him make her hands shake. "Good morning." Victor smiled at her. "Miss Carter, isn't it? You've made quite an impression. I was just bringing lunch." "I'm sure you were." He stepped toward the door, close enough that Annie had to decide whether to move. She did not. "You should be careful. Men like Richard have short memories once the crisis passes." Annie looked him in the eye. "Then I guess we'll see what kind of memory he has." Something like approval moved across Clara's face. Victor gave Richard one last look. "The board won't like this." "Then they can call me," Richard said. They will. I'll answer. Victor left without saying goodbye. His footsteps moved down the hall, sharp against the floor. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Clara said, "I hate him." Annie glanced at her. "You've got good instincts." Richard sat down slowly. The confrontation had taken more from him than he wanted to admit. "I owe you an apology, Annie. He should never have spoken to you that way." "He spoke the way he thinks," Annie said. "I'd rather know." Clara looked at her. "Does that happen a lot?" Annie adjusted the tray, buying herself a second. "People see the uniform first. Sometimes they never make it past that." Richard heard the sentence as an accusation against more than Victor. He had done it too. The first thing he had seen that Thanksgiving night was not Annie's kindness. It was her job. "I saw it too," he said. Annie did not rescue him from the discomfort. "Yes, sir, you did." Clara watched them both. "And now?" Richard looked at Annie. "Now I'm trying to see people before I see what they can do for me." "That's a start," Annie said. She handed Clara the broth and helped adjust the small table across the bed. Clara's hands were still weak, so Annie positioned the spoon within reach without making a performance of helping. Richard noticed that too. Annie did not take over. She made space. Clara took one small sip and made a face. "This tastes like someone whispered chicken over hot water." Annie laughed before she could stop herself. "That's hospital broth, ma'am. It's more of a rumor than a meal." Richard looked at the sandwich on his own tray. "Should I be afraid?" "Only if you believe turkey should bounce." Clara's mouth curved. The smile was small, but it reached Richard like light through a cracked door. Later, when Annie left to finish her rounds and Clara drifted back to sleep, Richard opened the next file Meredith had sent. This one included photographs of street, Luke's basement, roof damage, attendance records, and handwritten notes from community meetings. He stopped on a picture of Annie standing beside Sister Margaret, handing a winter coat to a boy with one missing front tooth. Richard stared at the image for a long time. The church was not an obstacle. It was a table, a place where people who had been pushed aside still found a chair. His phone buzzed. "Meredith, Victor has contacted 2 board members. He is framing this as instability due to personal trauma." Richard typed back. "Schedule an emergency board call for tomorrow. Include outside counsel. Send full Street Luke's file to every member tonight." Then he added, "And Meredith, no summaries. Names included." Clara stirred. "You're typing angry." "I didn't know that had a sound." "It does when you do it." He set the phone down. "Victor is moving against me. Are you surprised?" "No." "Are you scared?" Richard considered lying, then did not. "A little." Clara opened her eyes. "Good." He frowned. "Good? Fear might keep you honest." He leaned back in the chair. "You've become very direct." "I had to." "You didn't hear anything softer." The words hurt, but less sharply than before because now he knew pain could be useful if he did not run from it. That evening, Annie returned with clean towels and found Richard reading another document, Clara asleep, and the sandwich half-eaten. "You ate," she said. "Und a protest. Still counts." Richard nodded toward the papers. "Tomorrow, I'm bringing Street Luke's before the board." Annie's hand paused on the towel stack. "What does that mean?" "It means Victor does not get to control the story anymore." "And what story will you tell?" Richard looked through the window toward the darkening Chicago sky. "The truth, including my part in it." Annie studied him for a long moment. "That will cost you." "Yes." "Are you ready for that?" Richard looked at Clara, then at the list of names beside his laptop. "No," he said, "but I'm doing it anyway." Annie smiled then, not because everything was safe, but because for once, a powerful man had not confused readiness with responsibility. Outside the room, the hospital moved through another night. Families waited, nurses worked, carts rolled, elevators opened and closed. Inside room 417, Richard Blackwood sat between his sleeping daughter and the papers that could shake his company, and he understood that the next battle would not happen in a hospital hallway. It would happen in a boardroom, where men in tailored suits would ask how much justice cost. And this time, Richard intended to answer. The emergency board call began at 9 the next morning, but Richard had been awake since 5. Clara had slept poorly, waking twice in pain, once from a dream she would not describe. Each time, Richard asked before helping. "Water, nurse, blanket?" Light off? It was clumsy at first, that new habit of asking, but he kept doing it, and by sunrise Clara no longer looked surprised every time he waited for her answer. At 8:30, Nurse Denise helped adjust Clara's pillows, then looked at Richard's laptop and the files stacked beside it. Board meeting? Yes. From a hospital room? Conference room down the hall. I didn't want Clara hearing men argue about why poor people are inconvenient. Clara opened one eye. Too late. I already know. Denise gave her a stern look. You need rest, not corporate warfare. Clara's mouth twitched. Tell that to him. He started late, but he's enthusiastic. Richard closed the laptop halfway. I can postpone. No, Clara said. Don't use me as an excuse to avoid a fight you should have picked years ago. That ended the discussion. Annie arrived a few minutes later with clean towels and a paper bag from the cafeteria. She had written Richard's name on it in black marker. What's this? He asked. Toast, eggs, and a banana. Denise said you tried to call coffee breakfast again. Denise, already at the door, lifted one hand without turning around. I stand by my report. Richard looked at the bag, then at Annie. Do all hospital staff conspire like this? Yes, Annie said. It's how we survive men who think their bodies are optional. Clara made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it had not hurt. Richard ate half the toast because 3 women were watching him and because, for once, he had enough sense not to argue. At 9, he kissed 2 fingers and touched them lightly to the back of Clara's hand, stopping short of anything she had not allowed. I'll be nearby. She watched him. Tell the truth. I will. Not the clean version. He nodded. The whole version. The hospital conference room smelled of dry erase markers and reheated coffee. Richard sat at the head of a rectangular table with his laptop open. Meredith appeared on the screen from Blackwood Tower, composed but pale. 8 board members joined from offices, homes, and airports. Victor Harlan joined last, seated in his own office. The skyline behind him arranged like a threat. Richard did not begin with greetings. You all received the full Street Luke's file last night. One board member, Martin Graves, cleared his throat. Richard, before we get into specifics, we want to express concern for Clara. We're glad she's improving. Thank you. Now we'll discuss the file. Victor leaned back. The file is being presented without context. Richard looked at him through the screen. Then provide context. With pleasure. Street Luke's is a deteriorating property with unpaid repair obligations. The development plan brings jobs, tax growth, housing inventory, and long-term value. A handful of emotional anecdotes should not derail responsible urban investment. A handful, Richard said. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes. Richard opened the list Annie had given him and held it in front of the camera. Deshaun Miller, 9 years old, eats dinner there 3 nights a week because his mother works overnight shifts. Mrs. Leona Price gets rides to dialysis through their volunteer network. Jamal and Tasha Green use that basement for homework because their family is between apartments. Mr. Ellis, a Vietnam veteran, receives hot meals there when his building loses heat. He lowered the paper. Are these the emotional anecdotes you're referring to? Silence moved through the call. Victor recovered first. Every development has displacement concerns. That is why we build mitigation plans. You mean relocation brochures and one-time payments people don't understand? That's an unfair characterization. Richard clicked a file open. Email from your deputy, dated November 4th. Approach elderly members separately. They're more likely to sign if leadership is not present. Another from your office. Roof damage gives us leverage before winter sympathy sets in. Would you like me to continue? Meredith's face remained still, but one board member looked down as if reading the messages for the first time. Victor's voice cooled. Internal language can sound harsh when stripped of operational purpose. Operational purpose, Richard repeated. That's what we call it when cruelty has a calendar? Martin Graves interrupted. Richard, no one here supports unethical pressure. But canceling the entire project could expose us to penalties. Then we pay them. Another board member, Elaine Whitcomb, frowned. That is not a strategy. No, Richard said. It is a consequence. Victor leaned toward his camera. You are reacting from guilt. Everyone on this call knows why. Your daughter is injured. You met a young employee connected to the church. Your judgment is compromised. Richard did not deny the facts. My daughter is injured. Annie Carter does work at the hospital and does help at Street Luke's. And yes, meeting her forced me to look at a file I should have read months ago. But my judgment was not compromised when I saw the truth. It was compromised when I allowed you to hide people behind financial language. Victor's face hardened. Be careful accusing me to cover your own negligence. Richard nodded once. You're right. My negligence is part of the record. That stunned the room more than anger would have. Richard continued, quieter now. I approved advancement on a project without understanding who stood in its path. I trusted summaries because summaries were convenient. I let distance make me comfortable. That was my failure. But your failure, Victor, was seeing that distance and using it. Meredith looked down, her hand near her mouth. Richard turned back to the board. Effective immediately. Victor Harlan is suspended pending independent investigation. All acquisitions tied to Street Luke's are frozen. Outside counsel will review whether pressure tactics violated law or policy. We will inform Street Luke's leadership in writing today that no further contact will occur without their consent and counsel present. Elaine Whitcomb said, and the development? The Street Luke's parcel is removed from the plan. Victor laughed once, sharply. You can't remove the center parcel and pretend the economics survive. Then the economics do not survive. Martin leaned forward. Richard, that could mean abandoning the project. Yes. You're willing to lose tens of millions? Richard looked at the faces on his screen. Some were angry, some uncertain. Some looked as if they were waiting to see which direction power would move before choosing their principles. I am willing to stop making money from a wrong I can now see clearly. Victor's voice turned low. The press will hear that you are unstable. Then they will also hear why. You think the public will praise you? They'll ask why you didn't know. They'll ask how many other neighborhoods Blackwood treated this way. They should. That silenced Victor. For the first time in their years together, Richard saw fear behind the smooth face. The call lasted another 40 minutes. There were objections, warnings, legal questions, investor concerns, and a quiet statement from Meredith that every Street Luke's communication had been preserved. By the end, the board did not applaud. Men like them did not applaud conscience when it threatened returns, but they voted to authorize independent review, suspend Victor's authority, and halt the Southside acquisition. When the screen finally went dark, Richard stayed seated. His hands were shaking, not from weakness, from the cost of saying aloud what he should have known before. The door opened, and Annie looked in. You done? For now. You look like somebody tried to run you over with a spreadsheet. He let out a tired breath. That may be the most accurate description of a board meeting I've ever heard. She stepped inside. And Street Luke's? Safe for today. Victor is suspended. The acquisition is frozen. I'm going to speak with Sister Margaret myself, but only if she agrees. Annie's face changed. Relief came first, then caution, because life had taught her not to trust good news too quickly. Safe for today, she repeated. Yes, today matters. It does. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you for not making yourself the hero. Richard thought of Clara's instruction. Tell the truth, not the clean version. I'm not the hero, he said. I helped create the danger. Annie nodded, accepting the answer because it did not ask her to comfort him. When Richard returned to Clara's room, she was awake and waiting. How did it go? She asked. Victor is suspended. Street Luke's is frozen out of the deal. Investigation begins today. Clara closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she was simply tired. Then she whispered, Good. Richard sat beside her. I admitted my part, he said. To the board. She opened her eyes again. That must have hurt. It did. Good. He almost smiled. You and Annie both seem to think pain is educational. It is when you stop making other people carry it for you. The sentence landed cleanly. He nodded. After a while, Clara's gaze moved to the letters on the table. Read me one. Richard stilled. Are you sure? No, but read it anyway. He picked up the first page. His fingers trembled less than they had the night before, but only a little. Dear Clara, my daughter, he began, and his voice nearly failed. Clara looked toward the window, not at him, but she did not tell him to stop, so Richard kept reading. He read slowly, stumbling over the parts where he confessed what she already knew. He did not ask her to forgive him. He did not explain why he had done it. He did not blame grief, work, fear, or the heavy loneliness after her mother died. He simply read the truth as he had written it. When he finished, Clara was crying silently. Richard lowered the paper. "I'm sorry." She wiped her face with the corner of the sheet. I know. It was not forgiveness, but it was the first time she had believed him. Outside the hospital window, Chicago moved under a gray sky. Somewhere across the city, Sister Margaret would soon receive a call that might let the children of Street Luke's keep their warm basement a little longer. Somewhere, Victor Harlan was already planning his next move. But in room 417, Clara let her father sit beside her while the letter rested between them. And for that hour, Richard did not look at his phone once. By late afternoon, the hospital room had become the center of Richard's world. Clara slept in short pieces, waking to pain, water, questions, and the kind of silence that no longer felt empty. Richard sat beside her with the first letter folded on the table and the second still unfinished. His phone stayed face down. For once, the world outside room 417 had to wait. Annie came in just after 4 with fresh towels and a small paper cup of ice chips. "How is she?" "Sleeping," Richard said. "Good. Sleep does more work than people give it credit for." Clara's eyes opened halfway. "I'm not asleep if everybody keeps discussing it," Annie smiled. "Then I'll discuss it quieter." Clara looked at the cup. "Are those for me?" "Yes, ma'am. The good ice, too. Not the sad kind from the machine by the lobby. There's good hospital ice?" "There is, if you know who to ask." Richard took the cup from Annie but paused before bringing it closer. "Do you want some?" Clara gave him a tired look. "You're still asking." "Yes. It's strange." "I know. I didn't say bad." He held the cup while she took a few chips. The act took less than a minute, but Annie watched Richard's face as if she were seeing a man learn an alphabet late in life. A knock came at the door. Meredith stood outside, holding a folder against her chest. She was in her early 40s, with neatly pinned hair and the strained expression of someone who had spent the day keeping a company from turning into a fire. Richard stepped into the hallway. "You came here?" "I thought some things shouldn't be emailed." Annie started to move away with her cart, but Richard said, "Stay a moment, please." Meredith glanced at Annie, then back at Richard. There was curiosity in her eyes, not disrespect. "What happened?" Richard asked. "Victor has retained counsel. He's claiming the suspension is retaliatory and based on emotional instability. He's also been speaking to 2 reporters. Nothing published yet, but it's moving." Richard's jaw tightened. "What is he saying?" "That you froze a major development because a hospital employee manipulated you during a family emergency." Annie's face went still. Richard saw it and felt anger rise so quickly he had to steady his voice. "He named her?" "Not publicly yet. Internally. Yes. Enough people know." Annie looked down at her hands. "I should get back to work." "No," Richard said. She lifted her eyes. "Mr. Richard, I can't afford to be part of whatever this is. You shouldn't be dragged into it at all, but I am, aren't I?" Her voice stayed calm, which made it worse. "That's how men like him fight. They don't just aim at you, they aim at the smallest person near you because they think that person will scare easier." Meredith looked at her then, really looked. "I'm sorry." Annie nodded once. "Thank you, but sorry won't stop him." Richard turned to Meredith. "What else?" "He's preparing to argue that Street Luke's is unsafe for occupancy. If the city inspects now and the roof issue is written up, he may push for emergency closure." Annie's breath caught before she could hide it. "The kids are there tonight." Richard looked at her. "How many?" "Maybe 12. More if it gets cold. Sister Margaret keeps the basement open when families have nowhere warm to go." Meredith opened the folder. "There's more." Victor's team had already drafted a complaint about structural safety. It wasn't filed yet. "He'll file it now," Annie said. Richard reached for his coat. Clara's voice came from the bed. "Dad." He turned back. She was watching him through the open door. "You're leaving?" The question was soft, but it carried 3 years of being left behind. Richard froze. Annie saw it. Meredith saw it. Clara saw him trying to decide whether justice for one child meant abandoning another. He stepped back into the room. "Only if you want me to." Clara's face tightened. "Not from physical pain this time. Don't put that on me." "You're right." He came closer to the bed. "I don't want to leave you. But Street Luke's may be forced closed tonight because I challenged Victor. Children could be pushed out in the cold. I can send lawyers. I can send Meredith. I can make calls from here. But if I go, it sends a different message." Clara closed her eyes. For a moment, he thought she would tell him to stay. A part of him wanted her to. It would be easier to remain in the chair and call that love. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet but clear. You asked me once why I wanted to work with kids instead of joining Blackwood. Richard nodded. I told you some children grow up thinking no one powerful will ever come when they need help. You said I was being dramatic. I remember. Go prove I wasn't. His throat tightened. Clara, but come back, she said, her voice trembling. Don't turn saving the world into another excuse not to come back. Richard took her hand carefully. I will come back. You promise? I promise. She held his gaze for a long second. Then go. Annie stood silent in the hallway. When Richard stepped out, she was already pulling out her phone. I'll call Sister Margaret. No, Richard said. Call her from the car. You're coming with me only if you choose to, not because I ask. Annie looked toward Clara. Clara gave a faint nod. I'm coming, Annie said. Someone needs to make sure you don't talk to church people like they're a board committee. Meredith almost smiled despite the tension. They reached Street Luke's as dusk gathered over the south side. 2 black SUVs stopped near the curb, followed by Meredith's car. Richard had brought an attorney named Paul Adler, a quiet man with gray hair and a leather briefcase. Annie went up the steps first, pulling her coat tight. The church windows glowed from inside, and through the glass Richard saw children seated at folding tables, some eating, some doing homework, one sleeping with his head on crossed arms. Sister Margaret met them at the door before they could knock. She looked at Annie, then at Richard. So, she said. The tower came to the basement. Richard lowered his head slightly. Sister Margaret, I'm Richard Blackwood. I know who you are. I owe you an apology. You owe more than that, but apology is a place to start. Annie looked at Richard as if to say, listen. He did. I approved movement on a project that targeted this church. I did not read enough. I did not ask enough. That neglect allowed people under my authority to pressure you and your congregation. I'm sorry. Sister Margaret studied him. That sounded practiced. It wasn't. Good. Then it can survive being tested. Before Richard could answer, a city vehicle pulled up across the street. 2 inspectors got out, followed by a man in a dark overcoat. Richard recognized from one of Victor's development meetings. Not a city employee, a consultant. Annie whispered, That's fast. Sister Margaret's face hardened. He filed it. The inspectors approached with clipboards. The older one spoke first. We received an emergency complaint regarding unsafe occupancy. Paul Adler stepped forward. I'm counsel for Mr. Blackwood. Before any inspection proceeds, I'd like the complaint record, filing time, basis for emergency status, and the name of the reporting party. The inspector blinked. Men with briefcases changed the temperature of a conversation. The consultant tried to interrupt. This building has known damage. Richard turned to him. Who hired you? The man paused. I advise on urban safety assessments. That wasn't my question. He did not answer. Richard stepped closer, voice controlled. If Victor sent you, call him and tell him I am standing inside the building he tried to close. Tell him every document connected to this complaint will be reviewed by independent counsel by morning. The consultant's confidence thinned. Sister Margaret watched Richard, not impressed yet, but paying attention. The inspectors still had to inspect. That much was fair. Richard did not try to stop them. Instead, he walked with Sister Margaret through the basement as she showed the leaks, the patched ceiling, the food pantry, the coats, the homework table, the children who looked up when strangers entered and then backed down when Annie smiled at them. This is Deshaun, Annie told Richard quietly as a boy with a dinosaur sweatshirt waved at her. He likes math if nobody calls it math. Richard nodded, unable to speak. The roof was damaged. The building needed repair. No honest person could deny that. But it was not a ruin. It was alive. Poorly funded, overworked, stretched thin, but alive. After an hour, the lead inspector closed his clipboard. The basement cannot host overnight sleeping until temporary roof protection and electrical moisture checks are completed. But I see no basis for immediate full closure tonight. You'll need repairs started quickly. Sister Margaret exhaled. Annie closed her eyes for 1 second. Richard turned to Paul. Hire the roof crew tonight. Temporary protection first. Full repair after inspection. Use my personal account, not company funds. Sister Margaret lifted a hand. We are not for sale. I'm not buying anything. Money always comes with a hand attached. Then put the control in your board's hands, Richard said. My attorney can draft it as a restricted emergency gift. No claim, no naming rights, no influence. If you refuse it, I'll respect that. But the children shouldn't be cold while you decide whether I've earned trust. Sister Margaret's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Annie. Annie said, he's learning. Slowly, the older woman snorted. Men with money usually do. Richard accepted that too. His phone rang. Victor. He answered on speaker. Victor's voice came through tight and angry. You have no idea what you're doing. Richard looked around the basement, at the buckets, the children, the tired volunteers, Annie's worn shoes, Sister Margaret's guarded face. Yes, he said. For the first time in years, I think I do. He ended the call. 2 hours later, after the repair crew had been scheduled, after the inspectors left, after Sister Margaret agreed to review the emergency gift terms, Richard stood near the church door while Annie helped a little girl zip her coat. You should go back to Clara, Annie said. I know. She told you to come back. I know. Then don't make her wonder. Richard nodded. Thank you for reminding me. Annie's expression softened. That's what people do when they're trying to help somebody learn how to love right. When Richard returned to Street Catherine, it was almost 10. He entered Clara's room quietly, expecting her to be asleep. She was awake. You came back, she whispered. Richard took off his coat and sat beside her. I promised. Her eyes moved over his face, searching for the old man who forgot promises once larger matters called. She did not find him, or at least not enough of him to turn away. How's the church? Safe tonight. Repairs start in the morning. Clara closed her eyes, and a tear slipped sideways into her hair. Richard reached for a tissue, then waited. She gave the smallest nod. He wiped the tear carefully. For the first time in years, Clara let her fingers rest against his for longer than a second. It was not forgiveness, but it was trust beginning to remember the way back. Clara fell asleep with her fingers still near Richard's hand, not holding it, but no longer avoiding it. Richard did not move for nearly 20 minutes. He sat there afraid that even the smallest shift would break whatever fragile thing had begun between them. When Nurse Denise came in to check Clara's vitals, she noticed his posture and raised one eyebrow. You know you can breathe, Mr. Blackwood. Richard let out a careful breath. I wasn't sure. Denise adjusted Clara's V-line and glanced at their hands. She knows you came back. I promised her. Promises mean more when the person has reason not to believe them. Richard looked at Clara's sleeping face. I know. Denise softened, but only a little. Then keep being boring. He looked up. Boring? Show up, sit down, ask before helping, eat when told. Don't make everything a grand gesture. Hurt people trust patterns, not speeches. Richard absorbed that as seriously as if she had handed him a legal strategy. Patterns, he repeated. That's right. Now go wash your face. You look like a rich ghost. In the restroom down the hall, Richard splashed water on his face and stared at himself in the mirror. The man looking back was unshaven, red-eyed, shirt wrinkled, tie gone. There was a white bandage at his arm, a faint coffee stain on one cuff, and a tiredness money could not conceal. For years he had built his image on control. Now control had left him, and what remained was not as worthless as he had feared. When he returned to the room, Clara was awake again, looking at the second letter on the table. Did you write another one? She asked. Yes. Is it worse than the first? Probably. She was quiet for a moment. Read it. Richard sat down and unfolded the page. His voice was low at first, uncertain, but Clara did not stop him. He read about the day her mother died, and how after the funeral he had decided grief was a room he could lock if he worked hard enough. He read about watching Clara become more like Evelyn, about the fear that she would choose a life where he could not protect her, and how he had confused fear with authority. He did not ask to be understood. He only admitted what had happened. When he finished, Clara stared at the ceiling. Mom would have hated what we became. Richard closed his eyes. Yes, she used to tell me you weren't always like that. I wasn't. Then I got rewarded for becoming like that. Clara turned her head. By who? Investors, boards, men like Victor, magazines, myself. That's a bad crowd. A faint breath escaped him. Yes. She swallowed. I don't forgive you yet. I know. I need you to hear that without collapsing. He nodded. I hear it. And without trying to earn it by Friday. I hear that too. Her eyes searched his face. Do you? I want to fix things quickly because that's how I've lived. But I'm learning you're not a problem to solve. Clara's mouth trembled, but she held herself steady. I'm a person you hurt. Yes. The room went quiet. It was not peaceful, but it was clean. Nothing false stood between them for that moment. Later, after Clara drifted back to sleep, Richard stepped into the hallway and found Annie near the vending machines, counting coins in her palm. She looked up too quickly, as if caught doing something private. The machine took my dollar, she said. Richard looked at the glowing rows of snacks. I can buy the machine. Please don't. I just wanted crackers. He reached for his wallet, then stopped. May I buy you crackers? That made her smile. Look at you learning manners. I have good teachers. She let him buy the crackers and a bottle of water. They sat on opposite sides of a small waiting area where a muted television showed morning traffic. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Annie opened the crackers carefully and ate, like someone trained not to waste crumbs. How did Street Luke's manage last night? Richard asked. Kids stayed until 9. Families found other places for the night. Sister Margaret said the roof crew is coming at 7, which means she'll be there at 6 telling everybody what they're doing wrong. She doesn't trust me. She shouldn't yet. No. Annie looked at him. That answer will take you far. He leaned back. Victor will not stop. I know. He's already trying to paint me as unstable and you as manipulative. Annie's fingers tightened around the cracker sleeve. People believe ugly stories faster when they already match what they think about someone. What do they think about you? That I'm young, black, poor, cleaning floors. So if I stand near a powerful man, there must be some trick in it. Richard's face hardened. That is not going to stand. Be careful, Annie said. Defending me like I belong to you won't help either. He looked at her, chastened. Then tell me what helps. Tell the truth. Don't make me the reason you changed. Make the wrong the reason you acted. And when people insult me, don't speak over me unless I ask you to. Richard nodded. All right. She studied him. You really are trying. I am. Trying doesn't erase damage. I know, but it might stop you from making more. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Meredith. He answered. Sir, it's out, she said. What is? A business blog published a piece. It says you halted a major South Side development after forming an inappropriate emotional attachment to a young hospital worker tied to the church. They don't name Annie, but the description is clear enough. Victor is quoted anonymously, I'm sure. Richard stood. Annie had heard enough from his expression. Send it, he said. Meredith's voice tightened. There's more. 2 board members are requesting a formal capacity review if you continue to override development strategy during Clara's hospitalization. Let them request it. Sir, this could escalate. Good. Then everyone can put their name on what they believe. He ended the call and looked at Annie. I'm sorry. She stared at the floor for a moment, then lifted her chin. Don't be sorry in private if they're lying in public. Richard heard Clara's voice in that sentence too. Tell the truth, not the clean version. By noon, the story had spread beyond the blog. Reporters called Blackwood Tower. A local radio host mocked the Thanksgiving soup conversion. Someone online found Street Catherine's staffing page and began guessing who the young worker might be. Meredith moved fast, having references removed where she could, but rumor traveled faster than decency. At the hospital, whispers started. Annie felt them first in the break room. 2 orderlies stopped talking when she entered. A cafeteria worker asked too casually whether she knew any billionaires willing to pay off student loans. Someone laughed. Annie filled her water bottle and left without answering. In the hallway, a visitor in a wool coat looked at her badge and said, You're the girl, aren't you? Annie kept walking. He followed with his voice. Must be nice, having rich men suddenly care about your church. Nurse Denise appeared from a patient room like a storm given human form. Sir, this is a hospital, not a gossip porch. You can either lower your voice or take it outside where security can educate you. The man muttered and walked away. Annie stood still, jaw tight. Denise touched her shoulder. You all right, baby? Yes. That was not my question. That was a reflex. Annie's eyes shone, but she did not cry. I've been called worse. I believe you, and I hate that you can say it so calmly. Inside room 417, Clara heard enough to understand. When Annie came in later with towels, Clara looked straight at her. I'm sorry, Clara said. Annie paused. You didn't do anything. No, but I know what it feels like when my father's world turns you into an object. Mine was a daughter-shaped object. Yours is a headline. Richard stood beside the window, silent, wounded by the accuracy. Annie's expression softened. That's one way to put it. Clara glanced at Richard. What are you going to do? He turned. Public statement. Full investigation. No mention of Annie beyond denying the lie. Annie shook her head. Don't just deny. Say what happened. Richard looked at her. What happened? I gave soup to a father waiting for his daughter. That's all. Anything that came after came because you finally read your own files. Clara nodded. Say that. Richard looked at both young women, his daughter in a hospital bed, Annie in a faded uniform, each forcing him to abandon the last pieces of cowardice disguised as caution. Then I'll say that, he replied. That evening, Meredith arranged a press statement for the following morning outside Street Luke's. With Sister Margaret's consent, Richard insisted it would not be held at Blackwood Tower. No polished lobby, no company backdrop, no language that made harm sound like weather. Before leaving the hospital for the night's final planning, he went to Clara's bedside. I'll come back, he said. She looked at him. You'd better. I will. And Dad? Yes? Don't protect your reputation. Protect the truth. He nodded. In the hallway, Annie waited with her cart, tired, exposed, but unbowed. Richard walked beside her toward the elevator. Neither of them spoke until the doors opened. Then Annie said, Tomorrow, they'll ask why you changed. Richard looked toward Clara's room once more. I'll tell them I changed because the truth finally got close enough that I could no longer pay someone else to stand between us. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time, Richard Blackwood prepared to face the public without a shield. Morning came without mercy. Outside Street Luke's community church, news vans lined the curb before the roof crew finished unloading ladders. Reporters stood in coats with paper coffee cups, checking their phones and talking into small microphones, while camera operators aimed lenses at the old brick building as if it were already evidence. A few church members gathered on the steps behind Sister Margaret. Some looked angry, some looked afraid. Most looked tired in the way people looked when they had spent years being discussed by strangers with better shoes. Richard stood inside the church doorway, watching through the glass. He wore a dark overcoat and no tie. Meredith stood to his right with a folder of documents. Paul Adler spoke quietly with Sister Margaret's attorney near the front pew. Annie was in the basement helping the children finish breakfast before school, because she had made it clear that she would not stand beside Richard as a symbol for cameras to use. I'm not your proof that you changed, she had told him that morning. You're right, Richard had answered. Now, Sister Margaret turned to him. You know they're not here for justice. They're here because a rich man falling down makes good television. Richard looked at the reporters. Then I'll try not to give them a performance. Good. Performers want applause. Repentant men should want repair. He nodded. I understand. She studied him. No, you're beginning to. Before Richard could respond, his phone vibrated. Clara. He stepped away from the door and answered at once. Are you all right? I'm in a hospital bed, so let's grade on a curve, Clara said, her voice weak but clearer than the day before. Denise turned the television on. You're watching? She said I had the right to see whether my father embarrassed himself in public. From somewhere nearby, Denise's voice called, I stand by that. Despite the pressure in his chest, Richard almost smiled. Clara grew quiet. Are you nervous? Yes. Good. You and Annie keep saying that. Because fear slows you down. You need that. Richard looked toward the church basement stairs. Annie isn't coming outside. Smart. I agree. Don't use her name unless you have to. I won't. And Dad? Yes? If they ask why you care, don't make it about me either. That stopped him. Clara continued. I want you to care because those people matter, not because your injured daughter approved the lesson. Richard closed his eyes. You're right. I know. I've had years to practice being right without you listening. The words hurt less than they would have before because he had stopped treating pain as an attack. I'm listening now, he said. Then go tell the truth. When the call ended, Richard walked outside. The reporters surged forward a little. but Paul raised a hand and kept them back. Sister Margaret stood beside Richard, not behind him. That mattered. Meredith stood on his other side. The church members remained on the steps. Annie stayed inside with the children. Richard looked at the cameras, then at the street, then at the old church doors behind him. "My name is Richard Blackwood," he began. "I am chairman of Blackwood Holdings. I approved advancement on a redevelopment project in this neighborhood without reading enough, asking enough, or caring enough about the people who would be affected. That was my failure." The questions started at once, but he lifted his hand. "I will take questions after I finish." The reporters quieted, some reluctantly. "For years, I built towers tall enough to cast shadows over neighborhoods I rarely entered. I called it growth. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was blindness, with better financing. In the case of Street, Luke's Community Church, my company pursued a property while ignoring the community it held together. Children eat here. Seniors receive meals here. Families come here when they have nowhere warm to wait. Those facts should have mattered before a public controversy forced them into view." A reporter shouted, "Did a hospital employee influence your decision?" Richard looked directly toward the cameras. "A hospital employee showed kindness to a frightened father on Thanksgiving night. That is all. My decision today is based on documents, facts, and the misconduct uncovered inside my own company." Another reporter asked, "Are you denying reports of an inappropriate relationship?" "Yes, completely. And I'll add this. Trying to smear a young working woman because she had the decency to share food with a stranger tells you more about the people spreading the rumor than it does about her." Sister Margaret's mouth tightened, but Richard could not tell if she approved. He continued, "Victor Harlan has been suspended from all duties pending independent investigation. We have preserved internal communications and referred the matter to outside counsel. The acquisition activity connected to Street Luke's is canceled." The word moved through the crowd. "Canceled." A church member behind him covered her mouth. Another whispered, "Thank God." Richard kept going before the moment could turn into applause. "In addition, Blackwood Holdings will establish an independent community trust for the Street Luke's property. The church board and community representatives, not my company, will control it. Emergency roof repairs have already begun through a restricted gift with no naming rights, no ownership claim, and no influence over church decisions." A reporter near the front asked, "How much will this cost your company?" Richard looked at him. "Less than it costs this neighborhood to be treated as disposable." Meredith glanced down, hiding a small breath. "And there is more," Richard said. "This morning, I am announcing the creation of the Empty Chair Thanksgiving Fund. It will provide holiday meals for people alone in hospitals, shelters, churches, and nursing homes. It will support temporary lodging for families waiting beside hospitalized loved ones. It will create scholarships for orphaned and low-income students pursuing nursing, social work, education, and community care. It will offer emergency aid to families facing medical crises and support community centers already doing the work long before men like me noticed." The reporters fired questions again. "Is this an attempt to repair your reputation?" Richard answered without hesitation. "My reputation deserves whatever questions it receives. This is an attempt to repair harm." "Why now?" He paused. "Because Clara almost died. Because Annie gave him soup. Because the old man in him had run out of places to hide. Because one empty chair had finally become unbearable. But Clara had warned him, 'Do not make it about me,' because the truth was placed close enough that I could no longer pay someone else to stand between it and me," he said. "And because justice does not become justice just because powerful men sign papers around a polished table." Inside the basement, Annie stood near the stairs, listening. A little boy tugged her sleeve. "Miss Annie, is that the rich man?" "Yes," she said. "Is he saving the church?" Annie looked toward the ceiling, toward the voice coming through the old floorboards. "He's helping fix what his people tried to break." The boy considered that. "That's better." "Yes," Annie said. "It is." Outside, a reporter asked, "Will Annie Carter receive money from this fund?" Richard's face changed, and everyone close enough saw it. "I will not discuss any private individual's finances without consent," he said. "But I will say this. No young person should have to choose between survival and a future. If the Empty Chair Thanksgiving Fund helps students like her, then it will be doing part of what it was created to do." Sister Margaret finally spoke, stepping toward the microphones. Let me be clear. Street Luke's is not a backdrop for anyone's redemption. We have served this neighborhood for decades. We will continue to serve it. Mr. Blackwood has admitted wrong and offered repair. We will hold him to every word. Richard turned to her. Please do. That answer did more than any polished statement could have. By noon, the press conference was everywhere. Some praised Richard. Some mocked him. Some called it a legal maneuver. Some asked how many other churches and neighborhoods had been pressured the same way. Richard did not object to that question. He told Meredith to prepare an internal review of every active redevelopment project involving community displacement. At Street Catherine, Clara watched the coverage from her bed. Denise stood with arms crossed. Well? Richard asked when he returned. Clara muted the television. You looked awful. I'll take that as honesty. You also sounded honest. He sat beside her. That matters more. She studied him. You didn't make Annie the story. No. You didn't make me the story either. No. Good. A few minutes later, Annie knocked and came in with a tray. Her eyes were tired, but lighter. Sister Margaret said to tell you she has 3 lawyers reading every word of that trust. Richard nodded. I expected 5. She's pacing herself. Clara smiled faintly. Is the church safe? For now, Annie said. And the roof crew is already making too much noise, so Sister Margaret is happy because she has someone new to boss around. Richard looked at Annie. I'm sorry your name got pulled into this. I know. I meant what I said. I heard. And the scholarship portion of the fund. Annie lifted a hand. Not today. Today the church got to breathe. Let that be enough. Richard stopped. All right. Clara looked between them and whispered. Look at that. He can be taught. Annie smiled. Slowly, Richard accepted the joke because both of them had earned it. That evening, as the hospital settled into its night rhythm, Richard opened another blank sheet of paper. Clara watched him from the bed. Another letter? She asked. Yes. To May? No, he said. To the board, then to every development team. What does it say? He looked at the first line. Effective immediately. No project will proceed until the people most affected are named, heard, and given power in the process. Clara closed her eyes, tired but peaceful for the first time since waking. Good, she whispered. Start there. Richard wrote slowly, with Annie's list of names beside him and Clara breathing steadily nearby. For once, the words did not feel like a statement meant to protect him. They felt like the beginning of a debt he was finally willing to pay. The first official scholarship application from the Empty Chair Thanksgiving Fund arrived 3 weeks later, though Annie had not meant to apply. Sister Margaret did it for her. You had no right, Annie said, standing in the church office with her coat still on and her work shoes wet from the sidewalk slush. Sister Margaret did not look guilty. She sat behind the old wooden desk, sorting donation receipts into piles, a pencil tucked behind one ear. I had every right. I raised you enough to know when stubbornness starts wearing a halo. I'm not taking charity from Richard Blackwood. It is not charity. It is a scholarship. It came from him. It came from a fund now governed by 7 people, including 2 educators, 1 retired judge, 1 nurse, 1 pastor, and me. Mr. Blackwood writes checks. He does not pick souls. Annie folded her arms. You know what people will say. People already talk when they have nothing useful to carry. They'll say I gave him soup to get money. Sister Margaret finally looked up. And will that become true because fools repeat it? Annie looked away. The church had changed in small, visible ways. The roof no longer leaked. The buckets were gone. A new patch of ceiling tile had been installed above the children's homework table. The pantry shelves held canned soup, rice, cereal, peanut butter, and powdered milk. None of it looked fancy. It looked safe, which was better. Still, Annie could not shake the feeling that accepting help would put a price tag on the one thing she had given freely. Sister Margaret softened. Baby, you did not sell kindness. You planted it. Don't be angry because something grew. Before Annie could answer, children's voices rose from the basement. Deshawn shouted that somebody had stolen his green marker. A younger child shouted back that green was not a private property. Sister Margaret closed her eyes. Lord, give me patience or a whistle. Annie almost smiled. At Street Catherine, Clara's recovery had moved from crisis to endurance. She had been transferred from intensive care to a private room with a wider window and less machinery. Though Richard still watched every monitor like it might betray him, she could sit up longer now. Physical therapy had begun, which she hated with enough focus that Denise called it encouraging. "This is torture," Clara said one afternoon as the therapist helped her take 3 slow steps across the room. "No," Denise said from the doorway. "Torture is your father asking me for the 4th time whether the walker is adjusted properly." Richard, standing 2 feet away, looked offended. It seemed low. "It was measured. I was only hovering," Clara said through clenched teeth. Richard stepped back at once. "Sorry." The therapist smiled. Actually, that apology had good speed. Clara finished the steps and sank carefully into the chair. Her face had gone pale, but there was victory in the way she lifted her chin. "Don't clap," she warned Richard. "I wasn't going to. You were thinking it." "I was thinking it quietly." That made her laugh, just once, but enough that Richard looked down to hide what it did to him. Later, when they were alone, Clara nodded toward the small container on the table. "Is that the soup?" Richard cleared his throat. "I made it." "You cooked?" "I attempted a supervised process." "Who supervised?" "Annie, over the phone. Then Mrs. Alvarez rescued what could be rescued." Clara looked at the container with suspicion. "That sounds dangerous." "It probably is." She took the spoon, tasted a little, and closed her eyes. Richard froze. "Well?" he asked. "It's terrible." His shoulders dropped. "But," Clara added, opening her eyes, "it tastes like you tried." "I did." "That's new." "Yes." She took another small spoonful. "Still terrible. I can improve." "You'll need to." He smiled then, carefully, not too much. The peace lasted until Meredith called. Richard stepped into the hall. "Tell me." "Victor is pushing back harder," she said. "The independent review found more communications tied to 3 other redevelopment zones, similar pressure tactics. He's claiming all actions were standard industry practice and approved by leadership, meaning approved by me." "Yes." Richard leaned against the wall. "Was he wrong?" Meredith was quiet. "Not completely." The answer did not surprise him, but it hit anyway. "There's also a shareholder group demanding you limit the review. They say expanding it exposes the company to liability. We are already liable for what we did. Legally. That's exactly what counsel says not to say." "Then tell counsel I said it in English, not in a filing." Meredith exhaled. "There's a board meeting Friday. They may try to force a governance vote." "To remove me? To restrict you? Publicly, they'll call it stability." Richard looked through the glass at Clara, who was staring at the soup as if deciding whether love justified a 3rd spoonful. "All right," he said. "Schedule it. Richard, if they win, the Street Luke's trust may survive, but the broader review dies. Then we make sure they don't win." When he returned, Clara studied him. "Bad news? Complicated news. That means bad with paperwork." He sat down. "The review is uncovering more than Street Luke's. Other neighborhoods?" "Yes." "And the board wants it stopped?" "Some of them do." Clara nodded slowly. "Then Street Luke's wasn't the exception. It was the doorway." That was exactly what Richard had been afraid of. That evening, Annie came by after her shift, still in uniform, her hair tied back loosely, fatigue in the set of her shoulders. Clara noticed. "You look like you fought a staircase," she said. "2 staircases and a supply closet." Richard asked, "Did you eat?" Annie gave him a look. "You've been spending too much time with Denise." "That means no." She ignored him and turned to Clara. "How's recovery?" "Painful. Humiliating. Occasionally seasoned with bad soup." Annie looked at Richard. "He made it?" "With witnesses," Clara said. "I told him low heat." "I used low heat," Richard said. Annie lifted an eyebrow. "Low for you may still be a corporate emergency." Clara laughed again, softer this time. Then Annie's face changed as she remembered why she had come. "Sister Margaret told me about the scholarship application." Richard stayed still. "I didn't submit it." "I know. I also won't decide it." "I know that too. But you're angry." "I'm scared," Annie said, and the honesty quieted the room. "If I accept, people will say my kindness was never real." Clara looked at her. "People said I left my father because I was spoiled. They didn't know what it cost me to walk away. People say things that make pain easier for them to dismiss." Annie lowered her eyes. Richard spoke carefully. "Annie, what you gave me that night cannot be bought. Not by me, not by anyone. The scholarship is not payment. It is an investment in someone the world should never have forced to choose between survival and a future. She looked at him then. That sounds like a speech. It was almost a speech, Clara said, but he meant it. Richard accepted the correction. Annie sat in the visitor chair. I wanted to study nursing, maybe social work. I kept changing my mind because both felt impossible. Why those? Clara asked. Because hospitals and churches are where people end up when life stops pretending to be fair. Annie rubbed her hands together. I know what it feels like to wait beside a bed with no one explaining things in a way your heart can understand. I know what it feels like to need help and hate needing it. Richard listened without interrupting. Annie continued, I don't want to be saved. I want to be useful. Clara's voice softened. Maybe letting people help you is part of becoming useful. Annie stared at her for a moment. That sounds annoying and true. It usually is. By Friday, the boardroom at Blackwood Tower filled with men and women who had benefited from Richard's old silence and now feared his new attention. Richard attended in person for the first time since Clara's accident. He did not sit at the head of the table right away. He stood by the window and looked down at the city he had spent a lifetime measuring from above. Victor was not present, but his influence was. It lived in phrases like fiduciary discipline, reputational containment, strategic focus, and operational stability. Martin Graves spoke first. Richard, no one disputes the need to correct excesses, but expanding this review across multiple projects could damage shareholder value. Richard turned from the window. Ignoring harm because finding it is expensive is not discipline. Elaine Whitcomb said, We are not a charity. No, Richard replied. We are a company, which means the damage we do has more reach, not less responsibility. Another member leaned forward. You are allowing personal guilt to reshape corporate policy. Richard looked around the table. Yes, guilt has finally become useful. No one knew what to do with that. He placed Annie's list of names on the table, beside new lists from other neighborhoods Meredith had helped gather. From now on, no project moves until we know who is being asked to carry the cost. Not parcels, not units. People. If that makes certain deals impossible, then they were only profitable because we refused to look. The vote was close, closer than Richard expected, but it held. The review would continue. Community impact boards would be created. Victor's suspension would remain. The Street Luke's trust would be finalized. The empty chair Thanksgiving fund would launch before Christmas, not next year. When Richard returned to the hospital that evening, he found Annie sitting beside Clara, both of them eating vending machine pretzels. Clara looked up. Well? Richard took off his coat. We won. Annie searched his face. Who is we? Richard glanced at Clara, then at Annie, then out the window toward the city. The people who were tired of being turned into numbers, he said. Annie did not smile right away. Then, slowly, she did. Clara held out the soup container from the table. Celebrate with this. It's still terrible. Richard took it from her. For the first time, when the three of them laughed, the room did not feel like a hospital room. It felt, briefly, like a table with no empty chair. Christmas came to Chicago with dirty snow along the curbs and lights wrapped around bare trees. Street Catherine still smelled of antiseptic and coffee, but Clara's room had begun to look less like a place of fear. Mrs. Alvarez had brought a small wreath for the window. Nurse Denise had taped a paper snowflake to the door, badly cut by one of her grandchildren. Annie had placed a hand-drawn card from the Street Luke's children on Clara's table. It showed a church with a fixed roof, a hospital with too many windows, and 3 stick figures holding bowls of soup. Clara studied it from her chair by the bed. She could sit up for longer now, though walking still took effort and left her pale. Which one is Dad? Annie leaned closer, the tall one with the serious eyebrows. Richard, standing by the sink trying to open a plastic spoon wrapper, looked over. My eyebrows are not that serious. Clara pointed to the drawing. The child artist disagrees. Annie smiled. Deshawn said he made you taller because billionaires are supposed to be close to the clouds. Richard looked at the picture again. And what did you tell him? That clouds are not the same as heaven, so don't get impressed too fast. Clara laughed, then winced and pressed a hand to her side. Richard took half a step forward, then stopped himself. Do you need help? She breathed through the pain. No, just don't be funny for a minute. I wasn't trying. That's usually when it happens. The room settled into the kind of quiet Richard had once avoided. Now he let it remain. Clara was improving, but recovery did not move in a straight line. Some mornings she spoke to him as if the years between them had thinned. Other mornings, one wrong word made her retreat behind a wall he recognized because he had built so many of them himself. He was learning not to pound on the door. A week earlier, the Street Luke's Community Trust had been signed. Sister Margaret had made 3 lawyers read every clause, then read it herself with reading glasses low on her nose and suspicion sharpened like a blade. The property could no longer be sold for private redevelopment without community approval. The church board kept control. Blackwood Holdings had no naming rights, no board seats, no hidden claim. The roof repairs were complete. The basement was warm. Victor Harlan had resigned before he could be fired, then announced through his attorney that he had been scapegoated by a chairman desperate for moral theater. 2 investigations continued. More reporters called. More old projects were being reviewed. Richard's lawyers warned him every week to stop admitting things in plain English. He ignored them when plain English was required. That afternoon, Meredith came to the hospital with final papers for the Empty Chair Thanksgiving Fund's first scholarship round. She wore a gray coat and carried a folder instead of a briefcase, which made Annie look at her with suspicion. "If that folder has my name in it, I may run," Annie said. "You look too tired to run fast," Clara said. "Betrayal from a patient, that's low." Meredith smiled and handed the folder to Sister Margaret, who had arrived with a tin of cookies and the authority of a judge. The committee voted. "I'm only delivering the result." Sister Margaret opened the folder, read for a moment, then looked over her glasses at Annie. "You got it." Annie stood very still. Richard, who had promised himself he would not speak first, kept his mouth shut. Clara did not. "Say something." Annie looked at Sister Margaret. "How much?" "Full tuition at Malcolm X College, for nursing prerequisites, books, transportation stipend, and reduced work hour support for 1 year. Renewable if you keep your grades up and don't let pride make you foolish." Annie's eyes filled, but she blinked hard. "That last part is not official language." "It should be." Annie took the paper with both hands. Her fingers trembled. "I don't know what to say." Richard spoke carefully. "You don't have to thank me." "I wasn't going to," she said, but her voice shook. Clara smiled. "Good. Keep him humble." Annie looked at Richard then. "I do need to say this. I'm accepting because the committee chose me, not because I owe anybody my gratitude forever." Richard nodded. "That is exactly how it should be, and I'm still going to work." "Of course, but fewer nights," Sister Margaret said. Annie glanced at her. "We'll discuss that." "No, we won't." For the first time, Annie laughed and cried at the same time. She covered her face with one hand, embarrassed, and Denise, who had appeared in the doorway at some point, crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. "Let it out, baby," Denise said. "Good news is allowed to make noise too." Richard turned toward the window until he could trust his face. Clara saw him anyway. "You're crying," she said. "No, you are. I have allergies." "To consequences?" Annie lowered her hand, laughing through tears. "That was a good one." Richard gave up pretending and wiped his eyes. Later, when the room emptied and Annie left for Street Luke's to show the children her scholarship letter, Clara asked Richard to help her to the chair by the window. He moved slowly, waiting for each instruction. "Hand there. Not too fast. Stop. All right. Now." When she settled, exhausted but upright, she looked out at the city. "You know I'm not moving back into the penthouse," she said. "I know. And I'm not joining the company." "I know. And you don't get to investigate everyone I date." Richard looked pained. "I know." She turned her head. "That one hurt you?" "A little." "Good." He sat beside her. "I want to know you, Clara. Not direct you. Not buy my way back. Just know you, if you'll let me." She looked at him for a long time. "I don't trust this completely yet. I understand. I trust it more than I did." His throat tightened. "That's more than I deserve. Probably." Her voice softened. "But maybe not more than you can grow into." For several minutes, they watched snow move between the buildings. "Dad," Clara said. The words still had the power to stop him. "Yes? When I'm better, I want you to come to one of the art therapy sessions at the center. I'd like that. You don't get to donate a wing before seeing what we do. He nodded. No wing. No plaque. No plaque. No speech. He hesitated. She looked at him. No speech, he said. Her mouth curved. You're improving. On Christmas Eve, Street Luke's hosted its first winter dinner under the repaired roof. Richard did not arrive with cameras. He came with Clara, who used a cane and hated that she needed it, and Mrs. Alvarez, who brought pumpkin pies because she had decided no holiday table should depend on men. Meredith came with her teenage son. Nurse Denise came after shift with her grandchildren. Annie moved between tables, no longer only serving, sometimes sitting, sometimes laughing, sometimes letting others carry the heavy pots. Richard stood near the kitchen holding a tray of bread until Sister Margaret took it from him and corrected his grip. You hold bread like it might sue you, she said. I'm learning. You better. Clara sat with two children drawing snowmen on paper plates. One girl asked about the scar near Clara's temple. Clara answered plainly, I was in an accident. Did it hurt? Yes. Were you scared? Yes. The child nodded, satisfied by honesty, and went back to drawing. Across the room, Annie watched Richard refill cups for an elderly man and a mother with twins. He did not introduce himself unless asked. He did not stand where people had to thank him. He moved awkwardly, but he stayed useful. Near the end of the meal, Sister Margaret tapped a spoon against a glass. The basement quieted. I won't make a long speech, she said. Clara leaned toward Richard. See? Learn from her. Sister Margaret continued. This church is still here because many people refuse to let it be reduced to a line on a file. Some of those people have been here for decades. Some arrived recently. Some arrived with more money than sense, but we are working on that. Laughter moved through the room. Richard accepted it. What matters, Sister Margaret said, is that the table is longer tonight. Not fancier. Longer. That is how a community survives. Annie looked at Richard from across the room. He remembered the first bowl of soup, the empty hospital chair, the way her voice had entered his worst night without asking for anything back. After dinner, Clara stood beside him near the repaired stairwell. You know, she said, Mom would have liked this place. Richard looked around at the folding tables, the children, the old brick walls, the volunteers packing leftovers. Yes, she would have. She would have liked Annie. Everyone with sense likes Annie. Clara glanced at him. She would have liked this version of you too. Richard could not answer right away. Clara slipped her hand through his arm, not because she needed balance, though she still did, but because she chose to. He stood very still, then covered her hand lightly with his. Outside, snow continued to fall on Chicago, softening roofs, streets, towers, and church steps alike. Inside Street Luke's, no one was saved by money alone, and no one was healed in a single night. But the roof held. The tables were full. Clara stayed beside her father. Annie's scholarship letter rested safely in her coat pocket, and for the first time in many years, Richard Blackwood did not look at a room full of people and wonder what he owned. He wondered where he could help. 1 year later, Thanksgiving returned to Chicago with a hard wind, a silver sky, and a line of people stretching from the front steps of Street Luke's community church down to the sidewalk. The old roof held firm above them. The basement windows glowed with warm light. A hand-painted sign hung near the entrance, written by the children in letters of different sizes. No one should be alone on Thanksgiving. Annie Carter stood under that sign with a clipboard in one hand and a pencil tucked behind her ear, checking names, meal counts, volunteer shifts, and transportation requests. She wore a navy coat over her nursing school sweatshirt, and her shoes, though still practical, no longer had cracked soles. She had finished her first semester near the top of her class, which Sister Margaret had announced to half the church before Annie could stop her. Annie still worked at Street Catherine, but fewer nights now. She still served at Street Luke's, but people had begun serving her too, and she was learning not to apologize for it. Annie, Sister Margaret called from the kitchen doorway, if you keep writing on that clipboard, I'm going to serve it with gravy. I'm organizing. You're hiding from compliments. That too. Sister Margaret gave her a look that had corrected children, contractors, donors, and one billionaire. Get inside. You've been standing in the cold for 20 minutes. Annie looked toward the curb as another van pulled up. One more group from the hospital shelter. Annie, all right, all right. She stepped inside, and the sound of the church basement wrapped around her. Folding tables filled the room, but they no longer looked temporary. They looked like they belonged there, covered in mismatched tablecloths, paper napkins, bowls of soup, baskets of bread, turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, and pies lined up along the counter. Children carried cups of water under the supervision of adults who trusted them only halfway. Elderly guests sat near the heater. A family from Street Catherine, whose son had spent 3 months in treatment, sat beside a widower from a nursing home who had not expected anyone to remember his name. The empty chair Thanksgiving fund had done more in a year than Richard had promised on those church steps. It paid for meals in hospital waiting rooms, rides for families, motel rooms near medical centers, emergency groceries, student scholarships, and heating bills for community spaces that stayed open when weather turned cruel. Some people praised Richard for it. Some never stopped questioning his motives. Sister Margaret said both reactions were healthy as long as the checks cleared and the community kept control. Richard Blackwood arrived through the side door carrying 2 trays of rolls and wearing an apron over a sweater Clara had bought him because, as she put it, "You own too many clothes that look like they're about to fire someone." His hair had more gray than it did the year before. He looked older, but less sealed off from the world. "Where do these go?" he asked. Annie pointed. "Bread table." "I knew that." "No, you were about to put them next to dessert." "That was strategic." "That was wrong." Clara entered behind him, using no cane now, though cold weather still made her move carefully. A faint scar near her temple remained, visible when she pulled her hair back. She had returned to her work at the art therapy center part-time and had agreed to let Richard visit twice. He had obeyed every rule: no donation, no plaque, no speech. He sat on a small chair while children painted cardboard houses, and when a boy handed him a brush, Richard painted a crooked blue sun. Clara kept the picture. "You're letting him handle bread alone?" Clara asked Annie. "I believe in supervised growth." Richard set the rolls down. "I can hear both of you. That's why we said it clearly," Clara replied. He looked at her, and the old pain flickered there, not gone but changed. Their relationship had not become perfect. Clara still corrected him when he slipped into command. Richard still sometimes reached for money before listening. They had argued in May, when he offered to buy the building where her art center rented space. They had argued in August when he called 3 times in one afternoon because she had not answered. They had argued the week before Thanksgiving when he tried to send a driver without asking. But now, after the arguments, he came back. He apologized without turning the apology into a trial. Clara stayed. They were building a pattern, and as Nurse Denise had said long ago, hurt people trusted patterns more than speeches. Mrs. Alvarez arrived with pumpkin pies, declaring that she trusted no one else with the crust. Meredith came with her son, who was now volunteering as if it had been his idea. Nurse Denise came after a double shift, took one look at Richard arranging napkins, and moved 2 stacks 6 inches to the left. "Better," she said. Richard nodded. "Thank you." Denise narrowed her eyes. "No argument?" "I'm maturing." Clara coughed into her napkin. By mid-afternoon, every chair was filled except one near the far end of the room. Annie noticed it first. Empty chairs always caught her eye now. They reminded her of hospital hallways, cold soup, and the night one act of sharing had opened a door no money could unlock. Richard noticed it too. Near the entrance stood an elderly man in a brown coat, holding a worn photograph in both hands. He had come in with the nursing home group, but had not sat down. His eyes moved over the crowded room as if searching for permission to exist there. Annie started toward him, but Richard gently lifted a hand. "Let me try this time," he said. She stopped. Clara watched from beside the bread table. Richard took a bowl of soup and a small piece of bread. He walked slowly, not like a man making an announcement, but like someone approaching a frightened animal or a sacred place. When he reached the elderly man, he did not ask for his story first. He did not offer a solution. He simply held out the bowl. "Sir," Richard said, his voice quiet enough that only those nearby heard, "sit and eat with us. No one should be alone on Thanksgiving." The old man looked at him, then at the soup. "My wife died in March," he said. "This is the first one without her." Richard nodded. "What was her name?" "Eleanor." Then we'll save room for Eleanor at the table too. The man's mouth trembled. He let Richard guide him to the empty chair. Annie brought another cup. Clara placed a napkin beside him. Sister Margaret, pretending not to cry, told a child to stop staring and pass the butter. The meal continued. Later, when plates had been cleared and children were drawing hand turkeys on construction paper, Clara stood beside Richard near the basement stairs. "You said it right," she told him. He looked across the room at Mr. Howard Mills, who was eating pie while showing Eleanor's photograph to Annie. "I learned from someone better." Clara leaned her shoulder lightly against his arm. "You've learned a lot." "Not enough." "No," she said, "but enough to keep learning." He accepted that. It was better than praise. It was permission to continue. Annie joined them, tired but smiling. "Mr. Howard wants to know if there's more coffee." Richard straightened. "I'll get it." Clara caught his sleeve. "Ask if he wants regular or decaf." Richard paused, then nodded solemnly. "Right. Consent-based coffee." Annie laughed. Clara laughed too, and Richard carried that sound with him to the kitchen. Outside, evening settled over Chicago. Lights came on in towers, apartments, hospitals, shelters, and old churches with repaired roofs. Somewhere, families still argued. Somewhere, people still waited beside beds. Somewhere, another empty chair reminded someone of all they had lost. The world had not become fair because one billionaire changed, one daughter survived, and one young woman shared her soup. But fairness had never arrived all at once. Sometimes it began with a chair left open. Sometimes with bread passed across a table. Sometimes with a father learning to ask instead of command. Sometimes with a girl who had almost nothing giving from the little she had. At Street Luke's, the last guests left with containers of food and names written down for follow-up calls. Annie folded the sign from the front door to save for next year. Richard helped stack chairs. Clara carried a small bag of leftover rolls to the car, pretending they were not heavy until Richard asked, and she let him take them. Before they turned off the basement lights, the three of them stood for a moment in the quiet room. 1 year earlier, Richard had sat alone above the city at a table for 12, unable to understand why wealth had left him starving. Now he stood in a church basement with tired hands, a healing daughter, and a young woman whose kindness had refused to become small. Annie looked at the empty room and smiled. "No one alone this year." Richard looked at the tables, then at Clara. "No," he said, "not this year." And for once, when they stepped out into the cold, Richard Blackwood did not look up at the towers he owned. He looked beside him, at the people walking with him, and understood that a life was not measured by how much space a man could claim, but by how many empty chairs he was willing to fill. The lesson of this story is that love should never be confused with control, and kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Richard Blackwood had wealth, power, and influence, but none of it could buy back the years he lost with his daughter, or the peace he had taken from others through silence and neglect. Annie Carter, with very little of her own, showed him that one small act of compassion can reach places money cannot. The story reminds us that justice begins when we stop seeing people as problems, numbers, or obstacles, and start seeing them as human beings with names, pain, and dignity. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is not to give a speech or make a grand promise, but to sit beside someone, share what we have, and refuse to let them face the dark alone. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.